Though we'll see some clear spells, the odd shower across parts of eastern and southern England, the last of the rain clearing away from northern Scotland. But by the end of the night, we turn our attention to the west with some heavy rain pushing into some western areas, some quite squally, gusty winds tied in with this, a warning out from the Met Office for parts of Northern Ireland to end the night. And wherever you are, though, it is going to be another very mild night with temperatures in the low to mid-teens. So a very wet morning, though, to start, of course, for Friday morning for parts of Northern Ireland, particularly southwest Scotland, running up towards the Western Isles as well. Some heavy rain pushing its way across other parts of Scotland and northern England. Not too much on this front as it crosses England and Wales. And then by the afternoon, the heaviest rain then confined to the far northeast of Scotland with sunny spells and the odd blustery shower to close out the day. Once again, though, it will be a very mild day, perhaps down a notch in terms of top values compared to what we'll see today, but still well above average for the time of year. Friday evening then sees further showers pushing back into some northern and western areas of the UK. Elsewhere, though, some clear spells for a time before some further rain then pushes back into the southwest. So it's very changeable, no few hours quite the same, and then this rain pushing its way further north into parts of Wales and the Midlands by the first thing on Saturday morning. Not quite so warm as it has been on recent nights, down into single figures across parts of northern and eastern Scotland. Elsewhere, though, we are staying above 10 degrees. And then through Saturday, we see these outbreaks of rain pushing their way northwards. Best of the weather for Saturday, probably across the far north of Scotland, where the sunshine lasting for longest. So it's a very changeable picture with further spells of rain or showers interspersed with some brighter interludes from many places and staying very mild.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank and, of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
To GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. It's always a big news day, so let's get stuck straight in. We will be giving you the very latest on a breaking and ongoing story in the channel. There are several ongoing incidents involving small boats with fears of people being swept out to sea. Concerns that we might be about to witness another loss of life in the channel. All this comes as the Home Office revealed 38,000 people have arrived on dinghies so far this year already, and the clandestine Channel Threat Commander for UK Border Force has also told the Commons Home Affairs Committee that, get this, between 1% and 2% of the Albanian male population, so men in Albania, has come to Britain as part of that. Unbelievable stuff. Talking of the channel, Home Secretary Suella Braverman is under increasing pressure now as it emerges that she allegedly made several security breaches. Do you care? We're also going to be talking about grooming gangs. Other news channels don't do it, so I might as well. 2 members of the Rochdale gang can now finally be deported. They've shown little to no remorse. Taxpayers paid around £2 million in legal aid for them and other members of that gang. This is happening right across the country. We're going to get stuck right into that. All that and much, much more coming your way after the latest headlines. But before that, of course, it is indeed those latest headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 3 o'clock. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. The Stormont Assembly in Northern Ireland has failed to elect a new speaker. The two nominations for the role did not secure the necessary support from across the Assembly. The DUP has refused to back the election of a speaker as part of its protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol. Earlier, DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson said he will not support the reformation of the Stormont Assembly.
I do not believe that sufficient progress has been made to addressing the issues of concern to the people that we represent. We were given a mandate, a clear mandate in the Assembly elections, that we would not nominate ministers to an executive until decisive action is taken on the protocol. That remains our position, and so today we will not be supporting the nomination of ministers to the executive.
The Sinn Féin Vice President has blamed the DUP for failing to form an executive.
Geoffrey Donaldson points the finger at everyone else for the DUP's own indefensible and enduring failures. The facts are that back in May, people voted for change. They voted because they want politics to work. The electorate want grown-up politicians to take everyday challenges seriously, the things that impact on the lives of workers and families. Geoffrey Donaldson and the DUP do not take these matters seriously.
Oil giant Shell has reported another quarter of huge profits. The energy firm made £8.2 billion in the 3 months to September and will increase payouts to shareholders. The earnings are lower than the previous 3 months, but still more than double the same period in 2021. In the first half of this year, they reported record profit amid soaring oil and gas prices. GB News understands UK authorities are responding to multiple incidents of small boats in the English Channel. It's understood at least 7 vessels were launched into the water in poor weather conditions. GB News has been told a Dover lifeboat was called to a buoy off the Kent coast after reports of a person sitting on top of it and a small boat with dozens of migrants nearby. Ramsgate and Dungeness lifeboats, as well as several Border Force vessels, have also responded to other incidents. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, says he's bought the social media company Twitter. The Tesla boss had a deadline of tomorrow to complete the £38 billion purchase, which he announced months ago, but then tried to abandon. Yesterday, he posted a video of him carrying a sink into the Twitter headquarters, captioned, "Let that sink in." In a post today, Elon Musk claimed that he bought Twitter to help humanity. The Conservative Party chairman says Rishi Sunak is right to give the reappointed Home Secretary a second chance. The Prime Minister is facing backlash over reinstating Suella Braverman to the cabinet role. Ms Braverman left her job in Liz Truss's cabinet after she was reportedly sent an official document from a personal email account. Speaking to GB News, Tory chairman Nadhim Zahawi defended her reappointment, arguing she admitted the mistake.
People deserve a second chance, and redemption is a good thing. Suella is a very talented Home Secretary. She's got a massive in-trade to deal with, not least with the small boats issue where people are being exploited, their lives being put in danger. We've seen the numbers rise this year.
Scotland's First Minister has written to the new Prime Minister for the first time, urging him to tackle the cost of living crisis. Nicola Sturgeon has asked Rishi Sunak to consider increasing benefits in line with inflation, as well as an extra windfall tax on energy companies. She's also called for increased funding for devolved administrations, blaming inflation for making it more difficult to fund public services. Ukrainian troops are said to be holding out against repeated attacks by Russian forces in 2 eastern towns. President Zelensky has accused Russian commanders of craziness in their efforts to capture the town of Bakhmut, which has been the centre of Moscow's aggression for months. Overnight, Russian forces struck a main power network in central regions of Ukraine, damaging equipment and the Ukrainian energy system. Millions have been left without electricity or heating for long periods of time. A 38-year-old therapist has been found guilty of killing her friend and dumping her body more than 200 miles away. Gemma Mitchell allegedly hit Mi Kun Chong over the head with a weapon at her London home, decapitating her, then leaving her body in woods in Devon 2 weeks later. The prosecution claimed Mitchell planned to murder the 67-year-old and fake her will to inherit an estate worth over £700,000. She's been remanded in custody and will be sentenced tomorrow. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick.
Welcome to GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Make sure you get in touch about that grooming gang story. We're going to be returning that throughout the show. A court has ruled, at least for now anyway, that 2 members of that Rochdale grooming gang can be deported. Do you think we're too soft on grooming gangs? Has political correctness got in the way of tackling the problem? GB Views at gbnews.uk. But before that, we start in the Channel. 38,000 people arrived so far. 1 to 2% of the male Albanian population have apparently come here. Get your heads around that. But now, the latest is that emergency services, well, they were scrambled to deal with several incidents involving small boats earlier today. There were fears of people being swept out to sea, possessions found somewhere in the Channel as well. Poor weather conditions, of course. Could our failure to deal with the small boats crossings and possibly our failure to show any deterrent whatsoever when it comes to deportations be costing even more lives? Joining me now to bring us the latest is our home and security editor, Mark White. Thank you very much, Mark. Mark, let's start with the incident that was taking place this morning, the incidents that were taking place this morning. Emergency services scrambled. What happened?
Yeah, multiple incidents that the lifeboats and Border Force were called to. We've had a few days of bad weather. It's not been possible for the criminal gangs to get these flimsy inflatables offshore. However, the weather has improved to the point, still 30-mile-an-hour winds and high waves, but they could get some boats offshore. 7 boats that have come into UK waters, but predictably they've got into trouble. The emergency services have been called. Now, one worrying incident in particular was at the Colbert Light Buoy, a light buoy that's about 9 miles off the Kent coast. Someone seen clinging to the life buoy and gesturing for help by passing shipping. That was relayed to the Coast Guard. When they got there, they found some personal belongings on that light buoy, but no sign of the person. So the fear is that they've been swept off and probably drowned. Yeah. The search has now been called off. Right. These individual drownings, we of course remember November of last year, 27 people drowned in a mass drowning incident. That made headline news all around the world, obviously. But on a regular basis, we get reports of people who are drowning out there in the Channel. They're falling overboard from these inflatable boats, or they're trying to come across in the likes of little kayaks, tipping over. You don't stand much chance
once you're in the Channel, really, either, do you? Let's be honest. Some interesting figures coming out today or late last night. 38,000 arrivals so far this year, which I believe is a record, and potentially 1 to 2% of the entire male Albanian population is here. Yeah, it's not a particularly big country. All the more staggering then that the vast majority of those coming across the English Channel are Albanian, as you say, upwards of 2% of that population as it stands at the moment. 38,000 people have crossed the English Channel so far this year, as you mentioned there. That is a record. Last year it was 28,000, so we're already 10,000 ahead of last year's figures, with still a couple of months to run. And we've seen from last year that actually these months are very, very busy months, so we could have a good few thousand more. We will certainly have a good few thousand more arriving before the end of the year. Yes, indeed. Now, I often get a little bit of stick for not wanting to tar all the Albanian population with the same brush or anything like that whatsoever. But there have been numerous reports of Albanian gangs and things. Are these people sometimes, anyway, looking to come here to get involved in crime at all? There is no doubt that many of the people that are coming across here are being brought across at the behest of the criminal gangs to get involved in that kind of criminal activity. We've got some
startling figures on that we'll be able to share with you next week.
Oh, wow.
On the situation with regards to Albanian criminal gangs.
Oh, brilliant.
But yes, many of them coming across involved then subsequently in criminality in this country. And of course, stoking tensions at places like the processing centre in Manston. There was an urgent question heard on that in Parliament today. I don't know if we have that clip that we can talk to. If not, that was the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, who said that he will be visiting Manston next week, this processing centre, which is overcrowded, meant to process people within a day.
Wow.
Some people have been there for a month at a time because of the sheer numbers that are crossing the channel.
And that ties exactly into what I wanted to ask you about next, because we are reporting regularly on things like migrant hotels, issues like you reported on live on this show yesterday about violence and disturbances, etc., at places like Manston, at detention centres. But now, potentially, some kind of new scheme where people can be given money and contracts by the Home Office in order to house migrants. What's going on there?
Well, this is the upshot of so many people coming across. They have to be housed somewhere. They can't be...
Gary Lineker must be happy.
Yeah, they can't be in hotels for such a long period of time. And we carried out some research a few months back which showed that 30,000 hotel rooms are being requisitioned by the Home Office for use every single day by... by asylum seekers, 30,000 hotel rooms. It is now costing, according to the latest figures from the government, £6.8 million a day to house them in hotels. Now, what the government tried to do is ensure that the hotels are an interim measure, and then on a slightly more long-term basis, they go into council housing stock or social housing stock. But there's only so much of that available. And, of course, local authorities across the country have their own needy individuals within their own local authority areas that they want to house in these council housing or housing association stock. So what is now doing is that agents on behalf of the government are seeking out private landlords who have second homes to take part in the scheme to allow these asylum seekers.
Well, it was inevitable. It's inevitable. Mark Wire, thank you very, very much. Our Home and Security editor there, giving you a comprehensive run-through of the latest goings-on when it comes, frankly, to immigration, legal, illegal in this country. A search rescue operation has been called off now after an individual was seen in the channel. Multiple emergency services scrambled earlier on to try to deal with some issues, including several boats there. 38,000 arrivals now so far this year. 122% of the entire male Albanian population is apparently now here in the UK, believe it or not. And yes, you too, maybe, could be the lucky recipient of some Home Office cash if you decide that you want to house a migrant. It's also, of course, been alleged now that, get this, Home Secretary Suella Braverman broke the ministerial code multiple times in her first spell as Home Secretary under Liz Truss, which was one of the reasons, anyway, behind her stepping aside just before Rishi Sunak's big reshuffle. Braverman was forced to resign just over a week ago after she sent an official document from a personal email account to a colleague, but she was reappointed by the now PM, Rishi Sunak. So, former Conservative Party chairman Jake Berry last night questioned whether Simon Case, who's the Cabinet Secretary, would be happy with Braverman's return after such a serious breach of the ministerial code. How do you feel about this? Joining me now from outside Downing Street to shed more light on this is GB News' political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, thank you very, very much. There was undeniably an element of principle, one would have thought, to Suella Braverman's stepping aside. She mentioned the government didn't particularly have much of a commitment to legal or illegal immigration, in her mind anyway. But actually, more emerging now, did she break the ministerial code a few times, not just once?
Well, that's the allegation, certainly, from Jake Berry, who was the party chairman up until Monday. He is suggesting there are kind of three big problems with the reappointment of Suella Braverman. First of all, that she did break, he argues, the ministerial code not once but several times. Serious breaches of the ministerial code, he branded it. Second of all, he questions Suella Braverman's version of events. Her argument is that she sent on this confidential Home Office paper, this cabinet paper, to a parliamentary colleague, and also, by mistake, she CC'd someone else in. Now, as soon as she was aware of that she came forward with that information, but his version of events is that she was confronted by the mistake that she'd made after she'd CC'd in the wrong person, effectively. And third of all, the allegation is that Sir Simon Case, who's the Cabinet Secretary, essentially raised objections to this reappointment, having been in favour of her sacking last Wednesday. And so all in all, what Labour are doing are calling for a massive investigation into this. They want to know what Sir Simon Case had to say about it all. And frankly, so do some Conservative MPs as well, Patrick. Caroline Noakes, who's a Conservative backbencher, today calling for clarity about what went on. I think it is causing him some damage, the Prime Minister.
Some people might argue that if she was caught out for it and she resigned over it / was pushed over it, then that's done now and she can come back. But I suppose the optics of that might not be particularly great. Darren, we've done a lot so far anyway on what's been going on in the Channel. There was a search and rescue operation that's now been called off. 38,000 arrivals, believed to be around 2% of the Albanian male population here now, apparently. And we've done Suella Braverman. So I just want to move away from that and talk about Northern Ireland with you. What's going on there?
Well, it looks like Northern Ireland is headed for another election this year, probably in mid-December, after Stormont today tried to reappoint another Assembly Speaker. That did not happen because the DUP are determined that there should not be power sharing restored there until this Brexit protocol, the Northern Ireland Protocol, you've had an awful lot about that over the last couple of years, is sorted out. They argue it puts a big border in the Irish Sea between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's damaging the economy there, and they're not willing to go back into government until the British government sort it all out. Sinn Féin argue that people in Northern Ireland are suffering by the fact there isn't or hasn't been proper government there since the start of this year. We've got stalemate, effectively, and so there is pressure, I think, now on the British government to try and get a deal with the European Union when it comes to this protocol. There seemed like there might be a little bit of wriggle room, Patrick, a couple of weeks ago, with Liz Truss sounding quite positive, the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, sounding quite positive, Brussels sounding quite positive as well. Can a deal be done? I don't know. Changing the government doesn't really help. Rishi Sunak did speak to Micheál Martin, the Irish Prime Minister, yesterday, and to Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, but the pressure will now be on to try and get some way through this, because elections in Northern Ireland always send people to the extremes. The centre crown gets vacated, and it means, as the people of Northern Ireland will tell you, lots more uncertainty and no one, frankly, dealing with this cost of living crisis in the province.
Well, this is it, isn't it? Darren, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey, our political editor there in Westminster. Just going to go very, very quickly anyway to one thing I've got in my inbox here, and keep these coming in, because later on we are going to be talking a bit about the grooming gangs issue. 2 members of that Rochdale grooming gang now, a court has ruled that they can finally be deported, shown little to no remorse, frankly, and cost the British taxpayer a huge amount in legal aid fees. We're going to be talking about that. My big question for you is, do you think that we're too soft on grooming gangs? Do you think political correctness gets in the way of that? But we are going to go to something else right now, because Liam McCaffrey, there we go, sorry about that. The European Central Bank has announced a fresh interest rate hike by 75 basis points, the 3rd consecutive increase this year. The question is, will the Bank of England follow suit with the next interest rate decision due on November the 3rd? It might be another squeeze for mortgage owners. Get ready. Liam Halligan is in the studio with me right now. I want to hear what our economics and business editor has to make of all of this with On the Money. Liam McCaffrey, how are you?
You get your Irish TV goons mixed up here.
Right, come on then, what's the latest?
I know we all look the same.
Oh, wow. My name's Patrick, I can get away with that. Right, go on, Europe, economy, talk to me.
So we know that the Bank of England has got another interest rate decision on the 3rd of November, but it's also influenced by major central banks around the world. So the big 2 central banks around the world are the US Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank, which oversees the 19 countries across the Eurozone, 400 million people or so on. Now, the central bank in America is raising rates fast. They just raised rates by 75 basis points. That's 0.75%. The ECB has this afternoon raised rates by 0.75%. That's its second 0.75 point rate rise in a row. The last one came in September. They also raised rates in June. Their rates are now 1.5%, their central bank rate. Our central bank rate is 2.25%, so a bit more. What does this mean?
Yes.
Why should we care?
Yes.
What this shows is that the global interest rate cycle is still going significantly up. It means the Bank of England is now more likely to raise rates than it otherwise would have been. We think it is going to raise rates. It's probably going to raise rates by at least 0.5%, maybe 0.75%. Now, that impacts mortgages, but what really impacts mortgages is the rate that's above that, which is the government's borrowing cost, and that's set by the markets, right? These things kind of move in parallel. At the moment, the Bank of England's sort of playing catch-up. The mortgage rate is really set by what's happening in the money markets, and we know, even though it looks as if the Bank of England's going to raise rates, we know over the last few days, as I've been saying on the money, throughout yesterday, the day before, we know that the borrowing cost in the money markets is generally coming down. It's still higher than it was, but it's generally coming down. So what that adds up to is if you're about to remortgage, right, or if you're about to refinance a personal loan or get your first mortgage, if you're lucky enough to be getting on the housing ladder for the first time, we all know it's really tough. It might be worth just waiting a little bit to see what happens in the next few days, because I think borrowing costs could come down even more. OK, all right, and just want to give one more to you, because we're going to be talking about this a little bit later on as well, which is potential for a bit of economic good news, dare I say it. Well, I mean, I actually was supposed to have brought party poppers in with me, but in the end, apparently it would have set the fire alarms off or something, but... Yeah, you have to get one of those sort of pointy hats or something. Yeah, exactly, no. Right, OK, so when it comes to... When it gone both ways. When it comes to that, economic good news, you say the price of gas has gone down, is that right? Yeah, what we've been seeing over the recent weeks, really, it's not really been noticed, but earlier this week, the price of wholesale European gas went below €100 per megawatt hour. That's down from €350 per megawatt hour back in August. Now, €100 per megawatt hour, it's roughly where it was before the war in Ukraine. It's still about twice what it was over the previous 10 years, so it's still elevated, but it's lower than it was. Right. And that means that once this period of the price cap is over, your prices there's a ceiling on them paid for by the government between now and April. We know that if you're a business or you're a household. Once that ends in April, there may be some additional help for vulnerable people, but prices may not be as bad as we thought they were going to be after April. So it is good news. And also, Patrick, it gives the government some room for manoeuvre in its fiscal accounts ahead of this big budget statement on the 17th of November, because a really big cost in these fiscal accounts, as you and I have discussed, is the cost of subsidising energy, that energy price cap. Exactly. If the price of energy is down anyway, it means the government subsidy is smaller, or there may not need to be a government subsidy. Yes. So rather than hundreds of billions of pounds, the energy price cap may cost much, much less, and that leaves more room for uprating benefits and for keeping taxes hopefully where they are, or maybe even cutting them a bit. Hey, there we go. Going for growth. Don't be daft. That's got to be worth a crack. Don't be daft. Yes, all right, Liam Gallagher, thank you very much. He'll be back with me shortly, our economics and business editor, with On the Money. Right, this is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, the DUP has confirmed it will not nominate ministers to the Stormont Executive as a midnight deadline for Northern Ireland parties to re-establish power-sharing government approaches. I'm going to give you the latest from Northern Ireland. I'm also going to be doing a lot of what's been going on in the Channel, and as well, brace yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, because we're going to be having a lot of discussions about this Rochdale grooming gang issue. A court has now ruled that 2 members of that grooming gang can be deported. I'm asking, why has it taken so long? Why have we had to pay for their legal defence? And what is being done to make sure an issue like this doesn't happen in another town like your town again very soon? I'll be back in a tick.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests.
And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Now, there's loads going on in Northern Ireland. We're going to be talking about a lot more as well later on in the hour. The latest on the grooming gang issue, defence spending, poppies galore as well, everybody. I better get mine on, I think, hadn't I? Anyway, but before that, a debate is taking place in the Northern Ireland Assembly ahead of a vote to elect the Speaker. So it's a last-ditch attempt to avoid another Assembly election. Under the current system, unless a power-sharing executive is formed before midnight tonight, the parties will once again be forced to go to the ballot box, and today members of the Assembly have failed to elect a new Speaker. It just seems like an unrelenting quagmire in Northern Irish politics, doesn't it? But let's cross over now to Belfast, where our Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie is wading through that quagmire for us. Doogie, thank you very much. So, what's going on?
Well, what a mess, to be honest about it. I mean, it was these institutions back in February. Paul Givan, the then First Minister, the head of the DUP at that time, he collapsed these institutions because of the protocol, that Brexit negotiation that left Northern Ireland's economy annexed into the EU. It drew a line, a border down the Irish Sea, but it also overwrote Article 6, the Acts of the Union, that changed the constitution of Northern Ireland without having a Senate. So the unionists here said we're not playing ball with that. None of the unionists, not the UUP or the DUP, although the UUP would have went into government, but they would not have overseen anything to do with the protocol. So they said we're not taking this because it keeps us away from Great Britain, UK, our largest market, and where we see ourselves as. Half the population here see themselves as British. So therefore, it broke the Good Friday Agreement. The DUP warned, and they stood on that mandate, that if they got back, that they would not be going into government until the protocol was sorted out. With everything that has gone on from then, from that election, we don't need to list it all with inside the British government. The only thing that did happen that was quite good was Liz Truss, even as Foreign Secretary, came across, visited, seen some of the top hauliers here in Northern Ireland that are having real problems with the protocol, and decided that she could maybe fix this. And to be fair to her, she was really seeming to get places. But she tried to put a bill through the House of Commons to help that. That has went to the Lords. It's been held up in the Lords a little bit, hasn't come back. It's been 24 weeks since the first government was trying to be formed here after the 5th of May elections. There is legislation in place that keeps ministers in Northern Ireland in place for those 24 weeks. Tonight that runs out, and the DUP have refused to elect a speaker here, which effectively collapses these institutions. Now, Chris Heaton-Harris at this point has said that he will call an election, although Naomi Long of the Alliance Party came out earlier on very nearly pleading with him not to do that, to put other people in charge and to try and nurse it through until they got past the protocol problems. The problem with all of this in Northern Ireland is once you have an election, both sides go to the extremes, and the DUP will come back and the Sinn Féin will come back, probably as the two largest parties. What order that is in, who knows? And those in the middle will be squeezed. Particularly the Ulster Unionist Party, who are very moderate unionists, and the SDLP. And those were the two parties that were actually involved in the Good Friday Agreement, putting it together. But this is where we've got to learn our history. And that happened, John Hume, with David Trimble back in 2005. Trimble couldn't sell certain parts of that Good Friday Agreement to unionism. Hume very much tried to ignore that, and that caused the DUP to come in on one side. Then Sinn Féin came in on the other, and for the last 2 decades from that, we have had this government that doesn't seem to be able to operate. No. And today, it really has got to the end of it. Chris Heaton-Harris will probably call an election. We believe in and around somewhere the 15th of December, but it will still come back with still the same two parties, and the protocol will still be in place. So unionists will not take power.
Oh, my days. You're going to be wading through treacle for years to come, Dougie. Dougie BT, thank you very much, our Northern Ireland reporter. Right, loads to come. Just going to delve into the world of my inbox very quickly. Terry's got in touch about an issue that we're going to be talking about right there. You can see it on your screen if you watched it on telly. The Rochdale grooming gang deportations. Don't quite hold your breath just yet, though, people, because, shock horror, there might be another appeal. But as it currently stands, immigration judges have said that 2 depraved members of that sickening, disgusting Rochdale grooming gang can finally be deported after years, after millions in legal aid for that gang. Little to no remorse. In fact, when questioned, one of them said in court that they hadn't committed that big of a crime. How many lives shattered? Not just in Rochdale, we've had it in Rotherham, we've had it in Telford, we've had it absolutely everywhere, up and down the United Kingdom. When will it end? And I'm asking the big question. I'm asking whether or not political correctness has got in the way of us dealing with this vile grooming gang issue. Terry says, Patrick, these gangs are still operating throughout this country. Indeed, they are, Terry, and it will not stop until people grow a backbone and do something about it. I'll be back in a tick.
It's just gone 3:30. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. The Irish Premier says there's still time to avoid a fresh election in Northern Ireland. It's after the Stormont Assembly failed to elect a new speaker, after political parties met in a final effort to restore the Assembly. Michael Martin has urged the DUP to go back into the Northern Ireland Executive, but the DUP's refused to back the election of a speaker as part of its protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol, paving the way for a new round of elections. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has accused the West of playing a bloody and dangerous game as he holds a major address in Moscow today. He also accused the West of being blinded by colonialism and is seeking what he called global domination and wants to control global resources. It's after Ukraine says its troops are holding out against repeated attacks by Russian forces in 2 eastern towns. Oil giant Shell has reported another quarter of huge profits. The energy firm made £8.2 billion in 3 months to September and will increase payouts to shareholders. The earnings are lower than the previous 3 months, but still more than double the same period in 2021. In the first half of this year, it reported record profit amid soaring oil and gas prices. And a memoir by the Duke of Sussex called Spare will be published on the 10th of January. The book's title is a reference to the phrase the heir and the spare and is expected to lay bare Prince Harry's life as a royal. Published by Penguin Random House, it's said to take readers back to one of the most searing images of the 20th century. 2 young boys, 2 princes, walking behind their mother's coffin. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Patrick will be back in just a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Welcome back. Big story this, because two members of a Rochdale grooming gang are to be deported, set to be anyway, to Pakistan after losing a 7-year legal fight to remain in Britain. Adil Khan, 51 years old, and Kwari Abdul Rao, 53, were convicted in 2012 of a series of sexual offences against young girls and jailed later the same year. It's one of the most infamous grooming gang scandals in the UK. I say one of because it seems to be happening in pretty much every town and city, as far as I can tell, and shows no signs of stopping. But the big question remains, why has it taken so long for them to be deported to another country? And why has it cost us, you, me, everyone we know, the taxpayer apparently, so much money? I've got loads of questions on this one right now, and to answer, hopefully, some of those is UK immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bangal. Thank you very much, Harjap. Great to have you back on the show. First things first, are they definitely going to be deported now, or is there another layer of this legal onion that they can pick through?
They'll try. I mean, they've been trying for 7 odd years. However, it does pretty much look like the judges aren't having it anymore. And they've pretty much said, look, we're disgusted at the crime and more disgusted at the denial that these people are still in after having done it and having been sentenced, and the refusal to accept, look, the nature of their crime and the severity of their crime. And it just seemed to be dismissing it
as, you know, isn't it? The judge,
it's not too bad. Yeah.
That's exactly it. The judge even said that they've shown little to no remorse. You're right there. One of those particular depraved child abusers said they hadn't committed that big of a crime. Apparently one of them wanted to stay in the country so he could be a role model to his own children. I mean, it makes me feel physically sick.
Yeah, can't make that sort of stuff up, really. I mean, it's just when they say a drowning man clutches at straws, that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, they know what they've done. They've been sentenced for it. Perhaps what would have helped their case was if they'd said, look, we put our hands up, what we did was wrong, we want to be an example and tell people to say, don't do this again. These were our reasons for doing it. But just staying in denial, you know, showing no remorse, you're not going to get any sympathy from judges. And this is what the decision has been. Look, they're going to send them to Pakistan.
Yeah, now, were they trying to claim, as part of the European Convention on Human Rights, that it would break their human rights in order to face deportation? I know a lot of people will be shouting at their TV screens now, going, what about the human rights of the young girls that were raped and abused and impregnated and all of this stuff? But they were trying to use the ECHR, is that right?
They were trying to use the Human Rights Act and trying to use everything they could, basically. Elements of UK law, elements of international law, to say, look, we shouldn't be sent back. We don't actually hold Pakistan. We've renounced our Pakistani citizenship. That was their main argument in all of this, to say, look, you can't send us back, we'll be stateless, Pakistan won't accept us. That was dismissed by the judge. Everybody's entitled to have human rights, even criminals. And so that's what the legal system is there for. It's there to assess whether their human rights will be impacted and weigh up against the human rights of others. Because the judges then have to look, are you going to be a threat to others' human rights? Because if so, then your human rights
you say that,
do not weigh
exactly.
as much. Yeah.
That's the big thing, and it's that question, isn't it? In my opinion, these people will never not be a threat. Certainly when you look at some of the things that they've done. Khan, for example, got a 13-year-old girl pregnant, denied he was the father. There's been various different things taking place as well throughout the course of this. 47 vulnerable young girls in Rochdale between 2008 and 2010, not all by those two. They were part of a wider gang as well. But this is taking place left, right and centre, up and down the country. I reported on the Telford grooming gang scandal. There's been one in Manchester. They're everywhere. Rotherham, Keighley. I mean, there seems to be no end in sight with all of this stuff. And a lot of people might be quite flabbergasted to know that the taxpayer is paying for their legal defence, aren't they?
Yeah, well, they're entitled to legal aid. Deportation is a key thing. So even in their criminal case, they would have got legal aid, and that runs up into thousands. But I don't think we can say that this sort of stuff is happening everywhere. There are grooming gangs, and there is evidence of grooming, and it goes across the board. It's not a specific demographic. It's not a specific race or nationality. There are people, and the argument is from a lot of people, well, hold on, you can deport people who were foreigners once or who have a sort of ancestry from foreign lands. But what about people like Rolf Harris? I mean, where would you deport him?
He's Australian.
So right. So where would you deport him? Shouldn't he have been sent back and deported? So if we're going to apply the law equally, it should apply to everyone. I mean, no one's a fan of criminals. No one wants to live in a community where there's rapists and groomers and
I get what you mean. I get what you mean, but I think the argument to that would be if there's any opportunity whatsoever to get a predatory paedophile out of your country, then you would take that, right? So
or keep them locked up.
Yeah, or keep... you've hit the nail on the head here, because it's exactly what I was about to ask you. Because, for example, Ralph, who's one of these people, he's a father of 5 himself, so good grief, what chance do they have? But, well, that's the irony. He's probably quite a good dad to his own kids and just didn't mind desecrating the lives of others.
Well, social services should be involved in that. They should be involved.
Mad, isn't it? Well, he was convicted, he was convicted of trafficking a 15-year-old girl for sex, jailed for 6 years. And this is what I want to ask you, because he served 2.5 years of his sentence before being released in 2014. 2.5 years for that crime and being part of a grooming gang is pretty shocking, isn't it?
A lot of sentences, and I see it as a lawyer myself, leave a lot to be desired. I mean, they even shock people like me who see sentencing every day. And I'm thinking, I am a dad. I've got 2 small kids. If that's something that happened to my 10-year-old daughter, I wouldn't want them to be out in 2.5 years. I think 6 years should mean 6 years, or at least close to 6 years. 2.5 is not close to 6 by any account, not if you round it up or down. So a lot of the sentencing does need to be desired, but that's where the government needs to look at the sentencing guidelines, needs to get the committees, get the consultations in, consult the public, and consult lawyers and judges, and then issue guidelines to judges. Look, that these are the guidelines. This should happen, and that leaves a lot to be decided. I mean, if these people had got 20 years. And 20 meant 20, then deportation wouldn't have been an issue. Because by the time they come out,
I get that. Look, thank you very much. It's great to have you on the show. It's Harjab Singh Bangal, the UK immigration lawyer. A bit later on, I'm going to be discussing something on this same issue, because we're going to stick with that. It's a really important topic, that, for me here, about grooming gangs. Which is about whether or not political correctness has got in the way of us tackling it. There have been police forces who've come out and said, yeah, actually, maybe it did. Maybe we did not turn a blind eye, that's too far, but we were reserved, maybe, in the way that we approached it, because we didn't want to, quote, stoke racial tensions. And I, as far as I'm concerned anyway, very, very angry about that, because realistically, what? Is the life of a young, vulnerable, working-class white girl not worth the same as somebody else? I find that hard to believe. But we're moving away from that for now, because Rishi Sunak is under pressure by senior military officials, as well as countries like Estonia, to raise UK defence spending. Now, the PM has not met his predecessor Liz Truss's pledge to meet the NATO target of 3% of GDP going on defence by 2030. So, upping our defence spending, basically. Of course, the ongoing issue in Ukraine, Zelensky is going to meet with Sunak at some point soon, we believe. Boris Johnson, by the way, just a little aside, is apparently going to look at how he can invest his time in getting a load of money for Ukraine. That chap is really looking for statues of himself left, right and centre. And fair enough, if you ask me. But defence editor at The Telegraph, Con Coughlin, has also said that spending should rise, not only as a signal to Russia that Britain take Europe's security seriously, but also because now is not the time to go soft on Putin. Con joins me right now. Thank you very much, Con. Great to have you on the show. So you don't think it's time for us to go soft on Putin? Realistically, can we afford to increase our defence spending by that much? What would our military look like? Would it transform our military, would it?
Well, I think we should find ways to afford it. We spent a lot of money on furlough and other things. And defence spending compared with the overall national budget is a relatively small percent. We're talking, as I say, 2% at the moment. And there's been a lot of talk over the last year about raising it to 3%. What would we do with it? Well, first of all, we'd start rebuilding the army, which is currently being cut to its smallest size since the Napoleonic Wars, which to my mind is utter madness. You know, we've got the biggest war in Europe since the Second World War. We've got Russia on the march. Vladimir Putin has made it quite clear.
Well, I'm worried as well, Con. I'm worried about whether or not just is our army being stripped back, but it's gone all woke and soft, for goodness sake. I can remember an advertising campaign during which halfway through it there was a pause for a call to prayer. You wouldn't do that on a battlefield, would you? I mean, are we having to, before we can fire at the Russians, would we have to ask them what gender they are and how they feel about the whole situation or not?
Well, there has been a lot of silliness in all the armed forces, actually. And the RAF has just had a terrible time with people resigning over woke issues because the RAF was demanding all kind of diversity targets as opposed to people meeting the normal.
So hang on a minute, Con. Sorry, just quickly on this. The defence of the realm is not something that I think should be left up to diversity quotas, frankly. I think that should be very much the best people for the job. But you are saying that in the RAF there have been diversity quotas, so potentially good, able-bodied pilots who would be good at defending this country have not been selected because somebody who ticks a certain box has been. Is that right?
Well, that's what the row's been about, and it's completely turned the RAF upside down. And I think there is a need for more diversity within all the armed forces. But as you say, the fundamental duty of the armed forces is the defence of the realm, and to do that, they've got to be able to fight effectively and robustly. And a lot of the wokeness that you're talking about does undermine the credibility. I mean, I've heard stories of tanks having to be fitted with protective cladding so people don't get hurt if they get bumped by them. And I mean, you do hear some very silly stories, but fundamentally, you know, we still have some pretty good, strong, robust units within the military, but they're very small. And the first thing I would say to answer your question is if there was more money for defence, we could regenerate the size of all the armed forces. The Navy doesn't have enough sailors to man both aircraft carriers, for example.
Which is bonkers. And also, by the way, sorry, the idea that you just used the word both aircraft carriers. I mean, there's only two, which doesn't seem like an awful lot from where I'm sitting. Well, by the way, when it comes to the old quotas and diversity quotas, I'm sure it will come as a great comfort to a Russian or an Iraqi pilot that they were shot down by a member of the LGBTQ plus community who's also an ethnic minority. I mean, I imagine they'll be relieved by that it wasn't a working class white lad from Carlisle. But there we go. So actually, how screwed would we be if it came to war with Putin? Because from where I'm sitting anyway, it might take quite a long time for our European friends to get their backsides in gear. By the time it had gone through the EU's committees, Putin would be on our doorstep, would he? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think we should rely on our armed forces to put up a good fight. But, you know, there's some pretty basic things, like we don't have enough stocks of ammunition. So how long do we sustain military operations against a resourceful foe like Putin? I mean, Putin himself has run down his ammunition stocks and is now in terrible trouble, which is why he's relying on Iran. But nonetheless, if we are going to have a credible fighting force, you need enough bombs and missiles and mortar rounds and bullets to actually fight. And I think a lot of our units have just been run down over the last decade. So I think, we've got to think very seriously about this and make sure we've got enough manpower and woman power, to
people power,
and the equipment and the stockpiles to be a credible force.
All right, Con, thank you very much. Con Coughlin, their defence editor and chief foreign affairs columnist at The Telegraph. Great stuff. That was sticking with a kind of military theme, actually. Why not? We thought we'd give you a little something patriotic to finish the hour on. The Royal British Legion has launched its 2022 Poppy Appeal. I need to get one. I'm going to start getting emails in a minute saying Patrick hates his country. But there we are. The campaign has raised hundreds of millions of pounds for serving and former members of the armed forces and their families since the end of the First World War. Fields of remembrance are now open to the public up and down the country, so members of the public can pay their respects. Well, our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody is in Swindon for us at one of those fields right now and joins us now. Jeff, where's your poppy?
Do you know, I have bought a poppy and I went to put it in, but unfortunately my thing's stitched up there, so I didn't have a pin. So I do apologise, but
That's
I have given
just
my
stitched
donation.
you up, but
Thanks
carry
for
on. What's
pointing
going
that
on?
out, Patrick? You have. That's what's stitched up, not me. Yes, well, the idea is that there's 6 of these fields of remembrance across the country, and you can come here and you can buy a little wooden memorial, and you can then dedicate that to somebody that has died and plant it in these fields of remembrance. And then after Remembrance Sunday, these will all be burnt, and then the ashes will be scattered over the fields of remembrance in France. Well, earlier on I spoke to Peter Saunders, who is the campaign fundraiser in Wiltshire. This is what he told me about the events. Why do you think it's so important for people to come and dedicate a memorial specifically for people they know?
It's such a personal place to come, and has such a personal, and in the area that it is, Royal Wootton Bassett has such a personal connection for a lot of people, especially with the more recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. So it's open to the public throughout the entire appeal. So very much a very personal place for a lot of people.
And this year we've also got Her Majesty the Queen on our minds, haven't we, at this time?
Absolutely, yes. She was a patron of the charity, the Royal British Legion, for 70 years, a former veteran herself as well, and really in her life completely epitomised what we're remembering at this time of year.
And also, on a side note, the RMT had organised a series of strikes over the next few days, but they've decided graciously to call off their strike on the 3rd of November to give people a chance to get out to these memorial sites, these fields of remembrance, and pay their respects. This, Patrick, is my poppy that I bought earlier, so I shall just hold that in place and pretend it's pinned in.
Ah, there he is. Good stuff, Jeff. Thank you very much, Jeff Moody there, reporting to us from a field of remembrance. What a nice idea that is. I'm sick and tired, really, of people... I don't know, maybe I'm going to wind people up here. Those white poppies. Really? I mean, come on. For all lives lost. What? Even the Nazis? Really? No, I'm sorry, I don't agree with it at all. Get a red poppy on as far as I'm concerned. I'll have to get one on tomorrow now. Otherwise, I'll get shouted at. Loads of you have been emailing in gbviews@gbnews.uk, and there is a lot more to come, ladies and gentlemen. Ongoing incidents in the channel. Did you know that around 2% of the entire male Albanian population is currently here in the United Kingdom, which may be why the other big news is that people could well be paid... Good news for Gary Lineker, this could be paid to house some of these asylum seekers. Would you? Do you fancy that, ladies and gentlemen? I'm also running a little poll at the moment on Twitter, which is on my own Twitter page, at Patrick Christys. Has political correctness got in the way of tackling grooming gangs? Because that's another big story for us all. 2 members of that Rochdale grooming gang have now been told that they will be deported to Pakistan. Potential for another legal challenge there, but unlikely as it would seem. And I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief. Yes, it's taken 7 years, good grief. Yes, some of them were allowed back out into the same town that they terrorised so they could bump into their victims at the shop. Yes, they did things like even get 13-year-old girls pregnant. I mean, for goodness sake. And just the cherry on top of that particular cake is that you paid for their legal fees. How do you feel about that? What is being done when it comes to tackling grooming gangs in this country? Is political correctness getting in the way of it? 90.1% of you on my poll so far seem to think it is. We're going to be talking about all of that and much, much more coming your way very, very shortly, right here on GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Don't be shy, get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I will see you in a tick.
Hello there, I'm Stephen Keats with your latest Met Office forecast, and we've seen some rain pushing its way northwards over the last few hours. This will be across northern England and Scotland this afternoon, brighter spells developing further south. It's quite a breezy picture out there, and once again it's very warm because the winds are coming up from a long way south. The rain is tied in with this occlusion here, which will be pushing its way further north, then a bit of a gap in the weather fronts for the remainder of today and into tonight before this cold front brings in some heavy rain into parts of Northern Ireland this evening. Elsewhere, though, we'll see some clear spells. The odd shower across parts of eastern and southern England, the last of the rain clearing away from northern Scotland. But by the end of the night, we turn our attention to the west with some heavy rain pushing into some western areas, some quite squally, gusty winds tied in with this, a warning out from the Met Office for parts of Northern Ireland to end the night. And wherever you are, though, it is going to be another very mild night with temperatures in the low to mid-teens. So a very wet morning, though, to start, of course, for Friday morning for parts of Northern Ireland, particularly southwest Scotland, running up towards the Western Isles as well. Some heavy rain pushing its way across other parts of Scotland and Northern England. Not too much on this front as it crosses England and Wales. And then by the afternoon, the heaviest rain then confined to the far northeast of Scotland with sunny spells and the odd blustery shower to close out the day. Once again, though, it will be a very mild day, perhaps down a notch in terms of top values compared to what we'll see today, but still well above average for the time of year. Friday evening then sees further showers pushing back into some northern and western areas of the UK. Elsewhere, though, some clear spells for a time before some further rain then pushes back into the southwest. So it's very changeable, no few hours quite the same, and then this rain pushing its way further north into parts of Wales and the Midlands by the first thing on Saturday morning. Not quite so warm as it has been on recent nights, down into single figures across parts of northern and eastern Scotland. Elsewhere, though, we are staying above 10 degrees. And then through Saturday, we see these outbreaks of rain pushing their way northwards. Best of the weather for Saturday, probably across the far north of Scotland, where the sunshine lasting for longest. So it's a very changeable picture with further spells of rain or showers interspersed with some brighter interludes from many places and staying very mild.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello and welcome back to GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. It's always a big news day. Don't let anyone fool you. So let's get stuck straight in, shall we? We'll be giving you the very latest on this breaking story taking place in the Channel. Several incidents reported of small boats, fears of people being swept out to sea, concerns we might be about to witness another loss of life All this comes as the Home Office revealed, get your heads around these numbers, ladies and gents, 38,000 people have arrived in dinghies so far this year. The clandestine Channel Threat Commander for UK Border Force has also told the Commons Home Affairs Committee that between 1 and 2% of the Albanian male population has come to Britain as part of that. Give it a few years and it'll be a great time to be a bloke in Albania, won't it? Talking of the Channel, Home Sec Suella Braverman is under increasing pressure as it emerges that she allegedly made not one, but several security breaches. She has the support, though, apparently, of the Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, who said he's got confidence in her. Is that like when the board of a football club say we've got total confidence in the manager and then off you pop? Anyway, we're also going to be talking about grooming gangs. That's right, very serious story, this, because 2 members of the Rochdale gang can now finally be deported. It comes after years of legal wrangling, loads of money in taxpayers paying for all their legal aid, and crucially, not a lot stopping this continuing up and down the country, as far as I can see. We're going to be asking the big question, which is whether or not political correctness is getting in the way of us tackling this grooming gang issue. All of that coming your way and much, much more. But first, it's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you and good afternoon to you. The top story today, the Irish Premier says there's still time to avoid a fresh election in Northern Ireland. That comes after the Stormont Assembly failed to elect a new Speaker after political parties there met in a final effort to restore the Assembly. Michael Martin has urged the DUP to go back into the Northern Ireland Executive, but the DUP has refused to back the election of a Speaker as part of its protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol, which in turn paves the way for a new round of elections.
I do not believe that sufficient progress has been made to addressing the issues of concern to the people that we represent. We were given a clear mandate in the Assembly elections that we would not nominate ministers to an executive until decisive action is taken on the protocol. That remains our position, and so today we will not be supporting the nomination of ministers to the executive.
Well, the Sinn Féin Vice President has blamed the DUP for failing to form an executive.
Jeffrey Donaldson points the finger at everyone else for the DUP's own indefensible and enduring failures. The facts are that back in May, people voted for change. They voted because they want politics to work. The electorate want grown-up politicians to take everyday challenges seriously, the things that impact on the lives of workers and families. Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP do not take these matters seriously.
Well, in international news, Russia's president has accused the West of playing a bloody and dangerous game and of being blinded by colonialism. Vladimir Putin is holding a major address in Moscow today, and he said he is seeking global domination and wants to control global resources. That comes after Ukraine says its troops are holding out against repeated attacks by Russian forces in 2 eastern towns. But overnight, Russian forces struck a main power network in central regions of Ukraine, damaging equipment at the Ukrainian energy system. GB News understands UK authorities are responding to multiple incidents of small boats in the English Channel today. It's understood that at least 7 vessels were launched into the water in poor weather conditions. GB News has been told a Dover lifeboat was called to a buoy off the Kent coast after reports of a person sitting on top of it and a small boat with dozens of migrants nearby. Ramsgate and Dungeness lifeboats, as well as several Border Force vessels, have also responded to multiple other incidents. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, says he has now bought the social media company Twitter. The Tesla boss had a deadline of tomorrow to complete the £38 billion purchase, which he announced months ago, but then tried to abandon. Well, yesterday he posted a video of himself carrying a sink into the Twitter headquarters, captioned, "Let that sink in." Well, in a post today, Elon Musk claimed he had bought Twitter to help humanity. Here at home, the Conservative Party chairman says Rishi Sunak is right to give the reappointed Home Secretary a second chance. The Prime Minister is facing a backlash over reinstating Suella Braverman to the cabinet role. Miss Braverman left her job in Liz Truss's cabinet after she was reportedly sent an official document from a personal email account. Speaking to GB News, Tory chairman Nadeem Zahawi defended her reappointment, arguing she admitted the mistake.
People deserve a second chance, and redemption is a good thing. Suella is a very talented Home Secretary. She's got a massive in-trade to deal with, not least with the small boats issue where people are being exploited, their lives being put in danger. We've seen the numbers rise this year.
Scotland's First Minister has written to the new Prime Minister for the first time, urging him to tackle the cost of living crisis. Nicola Sturgeon has asked Rishi Sunak to consider increasing benefits in line with inflation, as well as an extra windfall tax on energy companies. She's also called for increased funding for devolved administrations, blaming inflation for making it difficult to fund public services. A therapist has been remanded in custody after being found guilty of killing her friend and dumping her body more than 200 miles away. Gemma Mitchell allegedly hit Mi Quen Chong over the head with a weapon at her London home in June last year. The 38-year-old drove to Woods in Devon 2 weeks later, where she left the decapitated body in a suitcase. The Met Police say Mitchell was in the process of doctoring wills to try and make a claim on her friend's estate, which is worth over £700,000.
Mitchell's never accepted responsibility for Deborah's murder, so there are certain questions which may remain unanswered. Why she kept her body for over a fortnight, why she decapitated her, and why she deposited her remains in Salcombe. But what we do know is that it was an evil act carried out by an evil woman, and the only motive clearly was one of financial gain.
You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Now, GB News can reveal that the UK maritime authorities are responding, or have been responding, I should say, to multiple incidents involving small boats in the English Channel. So at least 7 vessels were initially pushed into the water in poor weather conditions, winds still up to around 30 miles an hour, as far as we're aware. And this is, of course, by people smugglers. There's concerns that someone was swept into the sea after possessions were found at a buoy 9 miles off the coast, but no sign of that person. It comes amid other news as well, a backdrop of other news. 38,000 arrivals so far this year, roughly speaking around 2% of the male Albanian population are, as we understand it, currently in the UK. Like I said before, give it a few years, it'd be a good time to be a bloke in Albania, won't it? But joining me now to bring us the very latest is our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Let's just start with what's been happening in the Channel today. So as we understood it, there were several incidents that took place. What's going on?
Yeah, we think that the activity in the Channel has now ended for the day, but 7 small boats intercepted by Border Force vessels, lifeboats, the people on those boats taken on to the Border Force vessels and taken to Dover. At least 250, perhaps 300 people.
Yeah.
Now, the most serious incident happened at the Colbert Life light buoy, which is about 9 miles off the Kent coast. We're told that someone was clinging to that lifeboat, according to reports from passing shipping, and that the rescue services attended. They found some personal belongings on the buoy, but no sign of anyone around. They searched the area, but it's been called off. So the fear is whoever that was has been swept out to sea. So some real concern there. It's been bad weather for a few days.
Yeah.
It's not great in the Channel at the moment, but it just shows the disregard that these people smugglers have for human life, because they're still putting these flimsy boats out to sea.
And also the fact that clearly there is no deterrent, it would seem anyway, for people to come over here. They're still coming in now. Record numbers, Mark. 38,000 arrivals already this year. Roughly speaking, 2% of the male Albanian population.
Yeah, 12,000 Albanians among those 38,000 that have crossed. 10,000 are male. Yes, the extrapolation is that's about 2% of the Albanian male population. Right. And all the more remarkable because clearly it's a very small country. But given that it's a small country, for it to be the dominant population or nationality being found on these boats, 60% of those who've been coming across in recent months are Albanian. That is of real concern. And authorities have told us that they believe the vast majority who are coming across, they don't want to claim asylum. They're unlikely to get asylum anyway, coming from Albania, but they want to enter the illegal economy. And many of them are coming at the behest, the orchestration of criminal gangs to enter the criminal trade here.
Yeah, and some concerning reports that came through just a couple of days ago about people absconding or, frankly, never even being detained to begin with, really. So landing on beaches, an uncontrolled landing or whatever you call it, and then just legging it into the local area. And local residents being very concerned about this. Some grandmother finding one in her grandson's bedroom, apparently. Local primary schools having to not let the kids go out for break and all this stuff. It is quite scary for people.
Listen, this is a really good and serious point, because what's happening with the Albanians in particular, as I say, they don't want to enter the asylum system. They want to come across to work in the illegal economy. So what they are increasingly doing is they're trying for beach landings so that when they land on the beach, they then scarper to wherever they meet up with those organised criminal gangs that will allow them to work in the illegal economy. And to do that, yes, you're right, they've been knocking on doors or just entering open doors, trying to get them
just
to
wandering
call
into
their
people's
friends.
homes.
Yeah. And you mentioned that one incident that was, the woman was on Nigel Farage's show, and it was frightening what she had to say. But we've seen a letter from Dover District Council, from a housing manager there, to tenants in Dover, telling them to keep their doors and windows locked because they've been getting reports of migrants who've been landing, who've been going into these properties, looking for keys, looking for car keys, looking for money, looking for mobile phones.
Well, I mean, we used to use the analogy, didn't we, when it came to just stopping these landings to begin with, about, well, if someone knocks on your door and said, I'm not going to tell you who I am or where I'm from, would you let them in? It turns out they're walking in anyway, quite literally.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real concern. There's no doubt about it. It differs, to be honest, from a lot of the small boat arrivals that we see that are non-Albanian, because these are people that do actually want to enter the asylum system in the hope of staying here and probably becoming, righteous in the sense of working legally in the economy at some point in the future. But for the Albanians in particular, I'm not saying every single one, but authorities tell us the vast majority want to come here to work in the illegal economy. It was said to the Home Affairs Select Committee yesterday in evidence by Border Force officials that they'll come, they'll work for 6 months, a year, send money back home to Albania, and then they'll head back home.
This is the other thing as well, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Mark White, we'll delve into that maybe next week, Mark, about the exact nature of...
Well, it's one of the points is worth making about working in the illegal economy. People say, oh, well, they're working in the economy. But in working in the illegal economy, they don't pay taxes. So any money they make goes back home to Albania. So in terms of actually being conducive to the public good, you've got to say, well, it isn't.
No, it's not. It's actively anti the public good. Mark White, thank you very much. Our Home and Security. And it's a remarkable stuff there, isn't it, when you talk about the national security, the domestic security of the things that Mark White was just saying there. People getting off boats, legging it into people's houses and then going to work in an underground economy, for example. Criminality, of course. But that security doesn't seem to matter too much to some people in the House of Commons. The security that does matter to them is whether or not Suella Braverman broke the ministerial code multiple times in her first spell as Home Secretary under Liz Truss. Interesting line of attack, this, for Labour, by the way, because many Labour MPs, of course, sat alongside Jeremy Corbyn, a man who the former head of MI6 or former MI6 chief said may have posed a threat to national security, and had an aide who was denied a security pass. But Suella Braverman was forced to resign just over a week ago after she sent an official document from a personal email account to a colleague, but she was then reappointed by now PM Rishi Sunak. What do you make of this, ladies and gentlemen? Do you think that this is some kind of smear campaign against Braverman, or do you think that actually this is really important stuff? You don't trust her with our national security. Conservative Party chairman, former Conservative Party chairman Jake Berry last night questioned whether Simon Case, who's the Cabinet Secretary, would be happy with Braverman's return after such a serious breach of the ministerial code. Does it imply that ethics aren't alive and kicking in Downing Street? Or actually, frankly, has she admitted what she did was wrong? It was an honest mistake. She's back and we've got to crack on with what's going on in the Channel and beyond. This afternoon, the Chief Commissioner of the Met, Mark Rowley, has thrown his weight behind her, saying that he has confidence in the Home Secretary. Joining me right now from outside Downing Street to shed more light on this is political news editor, it's Darren McCaffrey. Darren, thank you very much. Right, OK, so is the screw being put on Suella Braverman here, or is this just a little bit of a tactic, do you think, by the opposition to disrupt Sunak's new cabinet? What's going on?
I think there are serious questions, and it's not just the opposition. Clearly, when we had Jake Berry laying into her essentially last night on the TV. First of all, on the Mark Riley point, though, I mean, ultimately the Home Secretary is one of his bosses. It's a bit like coming out and saying you haven't got confidence in your boss. I think that wouldn't be necessarily terribly good for your career prospects. But let's deal with what Jake Berry was saying last night. He is, or was, I should say, the Conservative Party chairman up until Monday under Liz Truss. He was around last week when Suella Braverman was essentially forced to leave the Home Office. He's got three allegations, if you like, Patrick. First of all, that there were several serious breaches of the ministerial code, he argues, not just the one, though this clearly pertains to the fact that she sent this email to a parliamentary colleague, confidential email that she shouldn't have done, and then CC'd in the wrong person, hence why it all came to light, which fulfills the second point, he argues, which is not that she, Suella Braverman, came forward with the information to the government saying, oh, you know what, I've made a mistake, that she was actually caught out and confronted by it. And third of all, that in the end, we've got this situation where Jake Berry is arguing that Simon Case, who is the Cabinet Secretary, so the most senior civil servant, essentially forced the Prime Minister's hand last week to say the Home Secretary at the time, Suella Braverman, needs to go. And also, then on the reappointment on Tuesday, was not very happy that she was reappointed to the job. So you've got this all coming from a former Conservative chairman. You've got another Conservative MP, Caroline Noakes, saying this all needs to be looked into. You've got the Labour opposition, unsurprisingly, piling in, saying we need to know what Simon Case had to say about all of this to Liz Truss and indeed to Rishi Sunak. And in the end, I think you've got a government who are, right, legitimately so, saying, you know what, she's a very capable minister, everyone deserves a second chance. Everyone's piling here politically in because maybe she's got policies on immigration that you do not like, but that is not a reason for her to resign. But in the end, has it done damage, I think, to the government in its very early days, where Rishi Sunak's under fire, having had a pretty smooth cabinet reshuffle? I think it is doing a bit of damage, is the bottom line, Patrick.
OK, Darren, thank you very much. Great stuff. Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor in Westminster, reacting to that news that Suella Braverman has more questions to answer. It would appear that even her own party, of course, as Darren was saying, well, some former members of it anyway, I suppose, were saying that actually she did break the ministerial code numerous times. What did people know about that? What did Rishi Sunak know about that when he appointed her? Does that undermine her for you or not? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Certainly not when it comes to Rosemary, who thinks it's a witch hunt. They're all worried, says Rosemary. She thinks that Braverman's got the Labour benches rattled. Well, amid all this economic turmoil that we've been hearing about as well, we've experienced, oh, gosh, never-ending economic misery, apparently. It looks as though there could be a glimmer of light for the nation's finances. A new report from the Resolution Foundation suggests a £40 billion black hole in the nation's finances could have shrunk by, get this, up to 15 billion quid. That's right, get your party poppers out, everybody, and your cake and all of this stuff. It means public spending cuts could be smaller than expected and tax rises may be scrapped all together. Let's hear what our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, has to make of all of this with On the Money. Right then, Liam, tax hikes. Talk to me. Not happening?
This whole idea of black holes in public finances, they're all predictions, yeah? And so no one really knows what's going to happen in the future. But it was pretty clear when government borrowing costs are really high and so the government would have to pay loads of interest on debt, when gas prices were really high, so the government would have to pay lots and lots of money to subsidise energy, to get that energy price cap, to deliver that to firms and to households. That was going to cost, you know, tens of billions of pounds, both those things. Over the last week or so, or over the last 2 or 3 weeks, but particularly over the last week, we've seen gas prices come down quite sharply on European markets, and we've seen debt interest costs come down because government borrowing costs have gone down because financial markets are now less worried that the Tory party was going to sort of self-combust and spend lots and lots of money, and so the British government wouldn't be good for its debt. So because the British government has stopped arguing with itself and because they're not talking about many, many unfunded tax cuts, as they say it in the vernacular, Financial markets are now lending the government money more cheaply, so the government's borrowing costs come down. That is why the Resolution Foundation, they're mainly kind of ex-Labour Party policy wonks, but they're respected people, they're good economists. That's why they're saying this black hole in the nation's finances could be much smaller than we thought before, because of lower gas prices, lower debt interest
But I would have a concern now, then, that unions and people like that can go, see, you have got the money to give us a whopping great big pay rise in line with inflation.
You can never talk about economics without talking about politics, literally in the same breadth. So it's good, we have these kind of discussions on GBNews, right? You hear from the political guy, now you're hearing from the economics person. I think that is a big danger. You and I have talked over the last few days that one of the big issues going forward over the next few weeks, NHS workers, some of a big pay rise claim in now, is the government going to award public sector workers an inflation-linked pay rise, which would mean a 10% pay rise, which is a huge amount of money. It's tens of billions of pounds across lots of public sector workers, when lots of private sector workers, 4/5 of us work in the private sector, aren't getting pay rises at all. And we have to pay for those public sector pay rises through our taxes. These are the conundrums. So, you've got the Resolution Foundation maybe doing the government a favour, saying, maybe, you got a bit more money knocking about than you thought you had, Mr Sunak. Maybe you can deliver that triple lock for pensioners. Maybe you can, not go ahead with that big hike in corporation tax from 19 to 25%. But, as you say rightly, it's ammunition for those public sector trade union leaders, and some of them are pretty militant, saying, see, you have got cash, you need to give it to us now.
Absolutely. Just something else that you hit on, we're going to talk about that in the next hour, I believe. Liam, that is that pension triple lock. You mentioned it, we might as well have a quick word on it now. What's going on with that then? Because they've been playing hokey-cokey with it for a while.
They have. There's more U-turns than Swindon Roundabout. You're going to use that?
I am.
So Liz Truss, in one of her last acts as Prime Minister, she stood at the dispatch box and she said, I'm not going to do the voice, she said, we are going to implement the manifesto commitment of observing the triple lock. What does that mean? That means the 11.5 million pensioners who get the basic state pension, they'll get an increase in their basic state pension, which is either the benchmark of 2.5% or the average earnings increase or inflation, right? Whichever is the higher. The highest at the moment is inflation, 10.1%. So she was basically saying we are going to give the basic state pension a 10.1% increase. Again, huge amount of money when a lot of people working aren't getting nearly 10.1%. No. So is Rishi Sunak going to go through with it? Yesterday, he was saying, maybe, maybe not. We'll have to see, even though it's a manifesto commitment. This morning, Nadhim Zahawi, who's also a very senior member of his government, was saying, we might implement the triple lock. And pension campaigners... Well, we were talking to one earlier, Mark Longhurst and I on GBNews. They were saying, look, this is doing in the mental health of pensioners. Are they going to get this pension increase or aren't they? Look, pensioners will definitely get some kind of increase. I reckon they'll end up getting earnings rather than inflation, which will mean a 5% pension increase, and there will be other help for particularly vulnerable pensioners, because there are some pretty wealthy pensioners.
There are.
Many young people will say, they bought their houses and all the rest of it. But they're also in this country, Patrick, we must never forget, a lot of pensioners who are lonely and in poverty.
Well, exactly that. And you mentioned
there may be more help, particularly for those vulnerable pensioners.
Well, and of course they can't do as much to change their circumstances.
And they can't just go out to work, can they?
No,
in many cases.
They can't. Exactly that. And look, I'm sick and tired, frankly, of the way that we treat many pensioners in this country. I think it's really, really
So do you think
bleak.
we should go through with the triple lock?
Well, I think it's a manifesto commitment. I think he has to, politically speaking, more than anything, because otherwise, if he goes, well, it's exceptional circumstances, I've got to deviate from this manifesto, do they then lose their mandate to govern?
But you know what? A lot of pensioners vote Tory anyway. They hold their nose and vote Tory. That's what the Tory strategists may be thinking. So they'd rather be seen by young people to say, we're not giving the money to the pensioners, we're going to give a bit more money to you. In my view, it's the under-35s that are going to determine this next election, not the over-65s.
Yeah, interesting stuff, Liam. I've talked about that all day. Thank you very much. Liam Halligan, their economics and business editor. Right, this is GBNews Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, it's the explosive book we've all been waiting not to buy. Prince Harry's memoir will be published worldwide in January next year. Have you heard what it's called? Spare. There you go. We'll be discussing that next.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. Yes, Prince Harry's potentially explosive and highly anticipated memoir will be published worldwide in January next year, so it misses out on being a stocking filler, but comes out just in time so that other, much better, more interesting books can't knock it off the bestsellers list in time for Christmas. Entitled Spare, although to be fair, it should just be called Entitled Spare, shouldn't it? A reference to the phrase the heir and the spare. It's expected to lay bare his life as a royal. The rest of the royals are likely to be less enamoured by the news. But get this, ladies and gentlemen, if you decide to get the audio book, it's narrated by Prince Harry himself. I'm surprised he could. I would have thought he'd be crying too much or being shouted at by his other half. Paul Dudridge, host of Politics People podcast, joins me now. And he's usually stateside. Is he stateside again? Yes, he is. There we go. You're in LA, aren't you? Oh, grief. I mean, have we apologised to the nation, by the way, for inflicting Prince Harry on them yet? But just talk to me about this book. It's called Spare.
It's called Spare. I can't confirm that the original title was Going Spare. My wife is driving me nuts. There's no truth. There's no truth to that whatsoever. Yeah, so he's received $20 million advance, about 15 million, it's probably 20 million pounds at the moment, the way the economy is going, but he's received $20 million for what is the publishing event of the millennium, and it's coming out on January the 10th, which is obviously a famous high watermark for gift giving.
Yeah, the publishing event of the millennium, that was, I mean, good grief. It's just shocking stuff, isn't it? The idea, I mean, he clearly hasn't written it himself, unless it's been written in crayon.
Well, do you remember when he did his art exam at Eton, there was that whole scandal about somebody else had apparently...
Well, I was going to say, did he do his art exam at Eton? But we couldn't possibly comment on that. But yes, no, carry on. So some ghostwriter has got a share of 20 million big ones just for an advance.
This is exactly the story that's going about. There has been, well, there's bound to have been a ghostwriter. I'm pretty confident in saying that. But the first thing I want to deal with is that we keep calling him Harry. His name is Henry, and that was Harry's our affectionate nickname for him before he said he hated us all. So I think the very first thing we can do, just out of decency and our self-respect, is to go back to calling him his christened name, Henry. This is not Harry, our mate, doing this.
I quite like that, yeah. So in a way, he's been living a lie his whole life. But there we go. So what is the reaction stateside? Why is it coming out in January? Because I've got a little bit of a theory on this, which is that he wants it to be the #1 bestseller, of course, and I'm sure it probably will be at the time, but it might not have been over Christmas. So now he's going to be #1 in the charts, is that right?
Listen, you are even as more or as cynical as I am. I think that's exactly the point. There's a lot of Christmas competition for books, and if this had come in anywhere other than number one, that would have been seen as a horrific error and another slightly takes the guilt off the gingerbread, as they would say in Buckingham Palace. So I completely agree with you. I think they're doing it in a down season, so it's got no chance of ever being beaten by any other book coming out that week.
Do we know anything about the content of this yet? Because there was serious things about, you shouldn't be publishing it. The Queen's just passed away. King Charles is coming to the throne now. Give him a bit of a breather. But I mean, is the book just going to be 250 pages of wah 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 trust fund wah wah wah?
Listen, I wish I could give you a more verbose answer, but yeah, that's basically the book. I think the dust jacket and the book liners basically just say wah wah wah, poor me. I think it's even interesting that it's spare. Just on a serious note, even his own life, his own description. This is his autobiography, and he's describing himself in relation to William. Even that is something that he's not even.
Yeah, get over it, Henry.
What's that?
Get over it, Henry. Stop it.
Yeah,
it's your own book.
And I think that's the most telling thing for me. This was the opportunity. He owns that front page. He owns that title, and yet he's putting himself in relation to somebody else. And I think that's very interesting for an autobiography title.
I just think it's pathetic before you even turn the page, isn't it? Look, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show. Paul Dudridge, there, host of the Politics People podcast, joining us live from Los Angeles, where thankfully we believe now Prince Harry actually is. Coming up today, the Royal British Legion has launched its 2022 poppy appeal. Will you be wearing a poppy? If not, why not? Why not? Okay, get your poppy on. I've been told that I have to do that in a few days' time, but there we go. We'll be looking at the good causes, and of course, is the money really raised for the poppy? I'm worried that we're losing a bit of patriotism as the years since the Second World War especially rolls on, but it's not just the wars, the world wars, that the poppy is there for, so we'll be talking about all of that. But first, here's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories today. The Irish Premier says there's still time to avoid a fresh election in Northern Ireland. That's after the Stormont Assembly failed to elect a new speaker after political parties met in a final effort to restore it. Michael Martin has urged the DUP to go back into the executive, but the DUP's refused to back the election of a speaker as part of its protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol. That, in turn, paves the way for a new round of elections. Russia's president has been accusing the West today of playing a bloody and dangerous game and of being blinded by colonialism. Vladimir Putin has been addressing Russians today, saying he's seeking global domination and wants to control global resources. That comes after Ukraine says its troops are holding out against repeated attacks by Russian forces in 2 eastern towns. Overnight, Russian forces struck a main power network in central regions of Ukraine, damaging equipment at the main Ukrainian energy headquarters. And Elon Musk, the world's richest man, says he has now bought the social media company Twitter. The Tesla boss had a deadline of tomorrow to complete the £38 billion purchase, which he announced 2 months ago but tried to get out of. Yesterday, though, he posted a video of himself carrying a sink into the Twitter headquarters, captioned, "Let that sink in." Well, in a post today, Elon Musk claimed he had bought Twitter to help humanity. And as you've been hearing, a memoir by the Duke of Sussex called Spare will be published on the 10th of January. The book's title is a reference to the phrase "the heir and a spare" and is expected to lay bare Prince Harry's life as a royal, published by Penguin Random House. It's said to take readers back to one of the most searing images of the 20th century, the 2 young boys, 2 princes, walking behind their mother's coffin. That's here up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Patrick Christys is back in just a moment.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio,
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Welcome back, everybody. It is 36 minutes past 4. Loads to come your way because we're going to be talking about grooming gangs. That's right. Yes, 2 members of that depraved Rochdale grooming gang are actually now going to be getting on a plane to Pakistan, which is rather nice, I think. It's only taken 7 years and pretty much loads of taxpayers' money, but in the end, we've managed to deport them. So we're going to be talking about all of that. Do you think we're too soft when it comes to that? And Rishi Sunak's cabinet, all a bit partial, or do you not care? It's emerged that the majority of them went to a fee-paying school. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Could you not care less? GBviews at gbnews.uk, but something very important to begin with. The Royal British Legion launched its 2022 Poppy Appeal earlier today. The campaign has raised hundreds of millions of pounds for serving and former members of the armed forces and their families since the end of the First World War. Our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, is in London Bridge for us right now. Paul, you are poppied up to the max. What's going on where you are?
Yeah, it's the first day of the Poppy Appeal. So over here we've got people selling poppies. You've got your usual paper varieties in different sizes, and also the metal ones that I find tend to last longer and stay on your jacket. And actually over here, look, you can even get, look, if we just have a look down here, just have a look at this. This lady's just got one for her dog. There you go. There you go. What's their name?
It's Monty.
Monty. Oh, Monty. Right. Okay. There you go. Look, Monty's just got him. He's just got his own poppy. There you go. So everyone's marking the day, getting their poppy as the British Legion launches its appeal, building up to November the 13th. That's when Remembrance Sunday is this year, and they're launching the campaign with this huge 6-metre wall, and you can see these circular glass plaques. Each of them represents someone who is in some way connected to conflict. So in this case over here, this is Clive. He was here earlier. He's one of the British Legion's ambassadors. He lost his sight in an unprovoked assault while he was serving. Money from the Royal British Legion has helped to support him and his family. Over here, Imogen, she's 11 years old. Her father's currently serving in the armed forces. And so she kind of talks in her little piece there about, and she was here earlier as well today, about how much that's affected her and her family when her dad's away serving in the army. There's another one here as well. Where is it? Down here, related to here. This one's about D-Day. So you're supposed to turn up and you can donate, take your poppy off, and then as the poppies disappear, the story's revealed. This one's Bernard. He is 98 years old. He was on the Normandy beaches, 6th of June 1944 in D-Day. He was here earlier and we had a little chat with him. What do you remember about D-Day?
The very most important and saddest thing was seeing all the dead soldiers lying on the beach. They arrived on the very first raid, 5 o'clock in the morning, and unfortunately the landing craft had dropped them out in too deep water. When they jumped out the landing craft, they got that much equipment on, they dropped down in the water and they got drowned. I'd never seen a dead body before, and it was sad to see all these lads lying there, and the army were going around taking their identity discs off them. That was the main thing I remember about D-Day. As a young lad, when you see all those dead bodies, I thought at the time, it could have been me.
You still do your salute, don't you?
Sorry?
You still do your salute, don't you?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Has he got one of you saluting now?
Yeah, you can do one now if you want. There you go. Brilliant.
Longest way up.
And can I just say thank you? Thank you for what you did. Thank you for what you did on D-Day.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
like the other lads, we thought when we get in, we'd finish the job off.
Oh, bless him.
Incredible guy, 98 years old, in really good health. Like, his daughter Sheila was here. She was telling me he still lives in the same house he's lived in since 1950. Doesn't he really? He's got some mobility issues, but he's still, his home hasn't been adapted. Still lives in his home. Still lives alone. Great guy to talk to. That was 1 minute out of a 20-minute conversation we had where he was talking about the war, what he did since the war. Really interesting guy. And in fact, a couple from Canada on holiday in London were watching him on their TV in their hotel room. They came down here from the hotel room, and she came over to say thank you from the people of Canada. And that's the whole point about buying a poppy. It's a way of saying, not just a way of supporting those who've served in the armed forces and their families, it's also a way of saying thank you. So you've just seen Monty the Schnauzer get his poppy. Patrick, it's time to get yours.
Yes, it is. I'm going to start getting emails in a second now. Where's your poppy? All right, I'm going to have to try and get one today and wear one tomorrow. I'm going to be held to that. All right, Paul, thank you very much. Good man, Paul Hawkins there. Monty the Schnauzer. Monty was, Montgomery was, of course, a very famous military figure, wasn't he? So there we go, very on-brand that as well. Right, well, we're moving on from that for now. Don't worry, I'll get a poppy on. Right. 65% of Rishi Sunak's new cabinet went to private school. Does that bother you? Does it not? As far as I'm concerned, that's probably a good thing because it shows that private schools are working. Otherwise, what's the point of paying for them? But there we go. That's over 9 times the number in the general population, according to data from social mobility charity the Sutton Trust. Mr Sunak himself was educated at the £46,000 a year Winchester College, which my school stuffed 6-0 at football, so 3 of the top jobs have all gone to people educated at fee-paying schools. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, Foreign Secretary James Cleverly and Home Secretary Suella Braverman. But does it matter? I'm joined now by education commentator, I imagine, it's Lord Ralph Lucas. Did you go to a private school?
I certainly did. I went to Eton.
You went to Eton?
What's really noticeable about this cabinet is no one went to Eton. Yes, there's a lot of people who went to private school, but they've gone to... They seem to have come from parents who have sacrificed to send their children to a good school and get their children a good education. They've come from good local independent schools, much more than the famous national ones. And those who went to the famous national ones, I think about half of them probably got there on army scholarships anyway. So it's a really interesting cabinet. A lot of them had real careers.
This is something that goes underestimated about private schools. When people go, oh, he or she went to a fee-paying school. Well, at the school that I went to, which was fee-pay, about 40% of people in every single school year are on some form of bursary. So it's not all as it seems, actually, when it comes to the fact that someone's gone to a fee-paying school. There are lots of scholarships going about. I would argue that what it shows is more the quality of education. And then people go, so the quality of education at Eton is better than it is at Staines Comprehensive. Well, yes, it is.
Probably. I don't know Staines Comprehensive, but it's certainly it is very good at Eton, and golly, at those fees it should be. It is a hugely expensive place to go. But as I say, a lot of these members of the cabinet have been to much less prestigious independent schools with much lower fees, very much attuned to helping ordinary parents get their children a good education. And I think it's a real testament to the quality of that sort of school.
But, Rafe, does it earth people? Does it ground people to have gone to a school? I was talking to one of my producers just off air, and apparently his school failed 2 Ofsted reports during the short time that he was there, which I think is actually quite an achievement, frankly. It's probably a greater achievement than my GCSEs, that managing to fail Ofsted. I mean, it begs the question, what on earth were they doing to the kids? But there we go. I mean, seriously, though, do you think politicians need to be from I don't know, from state schools and have grown up skin and have, you know, looked at a chocolate digestive for breakfast, licked the chocolate off it for lunch and then eaten the crumbs for dinner?
I think it's very important that there are some members of a cabinet who've been through that. It's a collective place. This is a very varied cabinet. Gillian Keegan, who's now in charge of education, went to a state school, became an apprentice, worked in business. You know, this is a world that she knows that she's looking after, and so I'm confident that this cabinet will have a real focus on making life better for those who are currently in state schools that are not doing well, which is where our real focus should be.
What are you a lord for, by the way? Final question, quickly.
I'm a lord because one of my ancestors was shot by Lord Fairfax, the second last person to die in the Civil War. And when Charles II came back, he ran short of money and my family bought a peerage.
Good grief, what a story that is. Well, there we go. Thank you very much, Lord Rafe Lucas. Fantastic. I'll have to talk to you again sometime. There we are. Right, we're moving away from that now on to a story that's, frankly, a lot more serious, OK? So 2 members of the Rochdale grooming gang are to be deported to Pakistan after losing a 7-year legal fight to remain in Britain. Why is this news, might you be saying now? We've been saying it all along, haven't we? Gosh, I can't believe that this is even controversial. It's been a 7-year legal fight. These people raped underage children, got one of them pregnant, for example, were part of a wider grooming gang circle that just wreaked utter hell and devastation on young, vulnerable, mostly working-class white children around the Rochdale area. Add that to the list. Rotherham, Telford, you take your pick, anyway. Manchester, for goodness sake. Anyway, now, Adil Khan and Kwari Abdul Rauf, they were convicted in 2012 of a series of sexual offences against young girls. They were jailed the same year. You won't believe this, by the way. One of them, I mean, it's bad enough he was only given 6 years. He was out in 2.5. But, yes, it was a problem trying to get them out of the country. Joining me now is the columnist and victim of sexual exploitation in Telford. It's Samantha Smith. Samantha, there are layers to this because, yeah, all right, OK, so they're potentially going to be deported. It doesn't look like they might launch an appeal to it now. But there's more to it than this that I want to unpack. Do you think that political correctness has got in the way of us preventing grooming gang scandals or indeed even prosecuting them properly?
Well, if you listen to Rishi Sunak's recent interview with GBNews, you'll know that is absolutely the view that the government takes, the view that I take, and the view that many victims and survivors take. It's been stated in no uncertain terms that in areas like Telford, Rotherham, Rochdale, Oldham, the police, social services, local authorities, those in positions of power failed to act because of quote-unquote nervousness against race and a desire to safeguard their own reputation rather than safeguard the innocent children that were being raped, exploited and abused. And the issue of these 2 men, you're right, is not just about 2 men being deported to Pakistan. This is about a far wider issue in the fact that our justice system seems to do more to protect the perpetrators and the paedophiles than to protect the victims of these crimes themselves.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's systemic. It goes back to decades, centuries even, of victim blaming, silence and ignorance. You see it in all the major institutions in this country and globally. The recent report, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which also covered child sexual exploitation as well on a national scale, it concluded its 7-year review. Coincidentally, the same period of time that these men had been appealing their deportation on quote-unquote human rights grounds, and it examined thousands upon thousands of instances of organised, of family-oriented, of white, Pakistani, black abuse against children, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation against children. And the thing is, these are not crimes of the past. And I'll say this until the cows come home. These are not crimes of the past. Children are still being groomed, raped and abused in towns and cities like mine across the country. And frankly, I would deplore any left-wing activist that goes and stands in front of those planes and tries to stop them from leaving, because those men didn't care about the human rights of the little girls they raped, exploited and abused. Why should we give them the opportunity to appeal on human rights grounds when they so frankly disregarded the rights of the little girls that they abused for so long?
I can't help but wonder whether or not there's a really tragic irony here, which is that people say, hey, look, we don't want to necessarily clamp down too hard just in case we, quote, stoke racial tensions. The implication there is that there might be some kind of racist backlash. From where I'm sitting, a lot of the victims appear to be working-class, young, vulnerable white girls. And I would argue that there's an element of racism when it comes to that, an element when it comes to some of the grooming gangs that we've seen who've been predominantly of South Asian heritage, that young, vulnerable, working-class white girls are lesser than.
So anyone can be a victim of child sexual abuse or exploitation. I don't want to take away the experiences of any survivor, but it would be remiss to refuse to discuss the prominent demographics of this type of crime, specifically group-based child sexual exploitation. Mainly is perpetrated against white working-class girls and is mainly perpetrated by South Asian, Pakistani men. This is clear as day. This is an irrefutable fact, and to completely ignore that, to whitewash it, to brush it over, only once again serves to protect the predators and the paedophiles. It's turning white working-class girls into second-class victims, suggesting that their pain and the abuse they suffered is not worthy of being relieved or being supported or being brought to the justice system. It suggests that there's no point in even trying to come forward because nobody will care. And police, if the police can say it, I can say it on national TV. They called young victims of child sexual abuse packet shaggers. They called them white slags. They said that they were child prostitutes. When these are children, they have no ability to consent on their own. A child cannot consent. A child cannot be a prostitute. A child cannot be asking for it. A child is never at fault when it comes to sexual abuse. And for police, social services, local authorities to spend decades trying to gaslight victims into believing that they are to blame for their own abuse is beyond comprehension. And we're at the very beginning of this fight still. There is so much more to be done to bring light to this issue and to ensure that justice is truly done and children are protected in the future.
Yeah, indeed. I just think it's worth saying, look, OK, obviously strong language there, but with potentially good reason on your part. Apologies if anyone was offended by that, but just on your part, a bit of context, why do you feel so passionate about this issue?
Because I lived it. I was abused for nearly a decade by successive men. It started when I was 5 years old and didn't finish until I was a teenager. I don't care if those words offended people, because if the police can say those to victims, people should be hearing about it on national TV. If I had to go through this, if thousands of other little girls had to go through this sort of abuse, go through this sort of victim blaming, this shame, and live with that for the rest of their lives, because trust me, the scars of abuse never go away. I can speak from my own experience. If we had to go through that, the least the public can do is open their ears and listen.
Yeah, how do you feel about the idea now that it's Abdul Kwari Ralph, I believe? I mean, it makes me sick, let alone how it must make you feel, but was trying to say that he's got 5 children here and he wants to be a good role model to his kids and he doesn't want to go back to Pakistan. He's renounced his Pakistani citizenship, he doesn't want to go there, and it will be against his human rights to send him. It remains to be seen exactly what happens. Let's deal in the hypotheticals here. Is wife and 5 children, not sure how old they are now, but stay here, and he goes back to Pakistan. Do you have any sympathy for his wife and children at all?
I have sympathy for children, always, because the children aren't the ones who held down little girls, threw them in taxis and raped them on the sides of the street. Those children are not to blame. And I don't know I'm not going to comment on his wife. She's an adult. She deserves her own privacy. She's not been implicated in any crime, so it isn't my place to go into that. But when it comes to those children's father, just because you have children does not make you exempt from the law. He made the choice to betray his children, to willfully separate himself from his children when he went out and abused other children. If anyone had done that to his 5 children, I assure you, he would be part of the angry mob demanding that he was deported.
Yeah, well, 100%.
Any parent would
100%
be demanding justice for harm done to their children. And it's no different. Just because he's a father does not make him exempt from the law.
I do find it remarkable when you see the way that some people in this country respond to the slightest element of offence, and then you think, well, hang on a minute, I'm very offended by what's taking place right across the United Kingdom, as far as I can tell it, and it's not getting any better. Samantha, thank you very much. Samantha Smith there, columnist speaking very, very passionately, and part of the reason for that is that she is also the victim of child sexual exploitation in Telford, one of many areas in the UK where grooming gangs seem to have this reign of terror unabated. I went to investigate it in Telford, actually, just at the time of this story broke. As I was talking to one victim in the street, just outside a little bit of a shopping precinct, one of her attackers, who'd done jail time, came back and was just walked past her. So they have to be confronted by these people on a daily basis. That is not justice. And Lindsay's been on GBViews at GBnews.uk. Thank you, Lindsay. Do you know who paid the legal costs for these vile people? Yeah, you, me, everyone. Taxpayer. The taxpayer paid for their legal aid. Years and years and years it's taken. Loads of people getting in touch. Thank you very much. Patrick, where are the #MeToo Brigade? I'm inclined to agree. That's from David there. Where are they indeed? Perhaps it doesn't suit their narrative, and I cannot help but feel as though political correctness is getting in the way of us tackling the grooming gang issue. What will it take for that issue to be taken seriously? And these people actually locked up. Believe it or not, one of those particular chaps from the Rochdale grooming gang served 2.5 years of a 6-year sentence before he was allowed back out into the same community that he terrorised previously. GBViews at GBnews.uk. And yes, we're going to be going very, very shortly to some other news there, because GB News can now reveal that UK maritime authorities have picked up at least 250 to 300 migrants in the English Channel today, and including young women and children. That is another crisis that's going on unabated. But right now, though, it's time for your weather.
Hello there, I'm Stephen Keats with your latest Met Office forecast, and we've seen some rain pushing its way northwards over the last few hours. This will be across northern England and Scotland this afternoon. Brighter spells developing further south. It's quite a breezy picture out there, and once again it's very warm because the winds are coming up from a long way south. The rain is tied in with this occlusion here, which will be pushing its way further north. Then a bit of a gap in the weather fronts for the remainder of today and into tonight before this cold front brings in some heavy rain into parts of Northern Ireland this evening. Elsewhere, though, we'll see some clear spells. The odd shower across parts of eastern and southern England, the last of the rain clearing away from northern Scotland. But by the end of the night, we turn our attention to the west with some heavy rain pushing into some western areas, some quite squally, gusty winds tied in with this, a warning out from the Met Office for parts of Northern Ireland to end the night. And wherever you are, though, it is going to be another very mild night with temperatures in the low to mid-teens. So a very wet morning, though, to start, of course, for Friday morning for parts of Northern Ireland, particularly southwest Scotland, running up towards the Western Isles as well. Some heavy rain pushing its way across other parts of Scotland and Northern England. Not too much on this front as it crosses England and Wales. And then by the afternoon, the heaviest rain then confined to the far northeast of Scotland with sunny spells and the odd blustery shower to close out the day. Once again, though, it will be a very mild day, perhaps down a notch in terms of top values compared to what we'll see today, but still well above average for the time of year. Friday evening then sees further showers pushing back into some northern and western areas of the UK. Elsewhere, though, some clear spells for a time before some further rain then pushes back into the southwest. So it's very changeable, no few hours quite the same, and then this rain pushing its way further north into parts of Wales and the Midlands by the first thing on Saturday morning. Not quite so warm as it has been on recent nights, down into single figures across parts of northern and eastern Scotland. Elsewhere, though, we are staying above 10 degrees. And then through Saturday, we see these outbreaks of rain pushing their way northwards. Best of the weather for Saturday, probably across the far north of Scotland, where the sunshine lasting for longest. So it's a very changeable picture with further spells of rain or showers interspersed with some brighter interludes from many places and staying very mild.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, coming up, GB News can reveal that the UK maritime authorities have picked up, get this, at least 250 to 300 migrants in the English Channel today alone. That includes women and young children, after responding to multiple incidents involving small boats, including fears that a chap has actually been swept away. We're going to bring you all of that and much, much more, including a rather lively discussion as well about whether or not political correctness has got in the way of dealing with the grooming gang problem. We're going to give you the latest on net zero, all of that stuff. We might even be live in the Commons. But first, ladies and gents, I believe it's your latest headlines with the wonderful Polly.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, the top story today on GB News, the Irish Premier says there is still time to avoid a fresh election in Northern Ireland. The Stormont Assembly has failed to elect a new Speaker, and political parties have convened in a final effort to restore the Assembly. Michael Martin has urged the Democratic Unionists to go back into the Northern Ireland Executive, but they've refused to back the election of a Speaker as part of their protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol, which in turn will pave the way for a new round of elections.
I do not believe that sufficient progress has been made to addressing the issues of concern to the people that we represent. We were given a mandate, a clear mandate in the Assembly elections, that we would not nominate ministers to an executive until decisive action is taken on the protocol. That remains our position, and so today we will not be supporting the nomination of ministers to the executive.
Well, Sinn Féin Vice President has blamed the DUP for failing to form a new Stormont executive.
Jeffrey Donaldson points the finger at everyone else for the DUP's own indefensible and enduring failures. The facts are that back in May, people voted for change. They voted because they want politics to work. The electorate want grown-up politicians to take everyday challenges seriously, the things that impact on the lives of workers and families. Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP do not take these matters seriously.
Michelle O'Neill. Well, Russia's president has accused the West of playing a bloody and dangerous game and says he's seeking global domination. Vladimir Putin, who's been addressing his country today, has also called the former Prime Minister Liz Truss crazy to discuss nuclear weapons and told Russians he wants to control global resources. That comes after Ukraine says its troops are holding out against repeated attacks by Putin's forces in two eastern towns. Overnight, Russian forces struck a main power network in central regions of Ukraine, damaging critical energy infrastructure. GB News understands UK authorities responded to multiple incidents of small boats in the English Channel earlier on today. It's understood at least 7 vessels were launched into the water in poor weather conditions, and GB News has been told a Dover lifeboat was called to a buoy off the Kent coast after reports of a person sitting on top of it with a small boat with dozens of migrants in it nearby. Ramsgate and Dungeness lifeboats, as well as several Border Force vessels, have also responded to multiple incidents. Now, the world's richest man, Elon Musk, says he has bought the social media company Twitter. The Tesla boss had a deadline of tomorrow to complete the £38 billion purchase, which he announced months ago but tried to get out of. Well, yesterday, he posted a video of himself carrying a bathroom sink into the Twitter headquarters, alongside the caption, which got shared many times on the social media site, "Let that sink in." Well, in a post today, Elon Musk claimed that he has bought Twitter to help humanity. Here, the Conservative Party chairman says Rishi Sunak is right to give the reappointed Home Secretary a second chance. The Prime Minister is facing something of a backlash over Suella Braverman's return to her cabinet role. Miss Braverman left her job under Liz Truss after she reportedly shared an official document from a personal email account. Speaking to GB News, the Tory chairman, Nadeem Zahawi, defended her reappointment, arguing she had admitted her mistake.
People deserve a second chance, and redemption is a good thing. Suella is a very talented Home Secretary. She's got a massive in-trade to deal with, not least with the small boats issue where people are being exploited, their lives being put in danger. We've seen the numbers rise this year.
A therapist has been remanded in custody after being found guilty of killing her friend and dumping the body more than 200 miles away. Gemma Mitchell allegedly hit Mi Quen Chong over the head with a weapon at her London home in June last year. 2 weeks later, the 38-year-old then drove the decapitated body in a suitcase to Devon, where it was left in dense undergrowth. The Metropolitan Police say Mitchell was in the process of altering Miss Chong's will to try to make herself the beneficiary of an estate worth over £700,000.
Mitchell's never accepted responsibility for Deborah's murder, so there are certain questions which may remain unanswered. Why she kept her body for over a fortnight, why she decapitated her, and why she deposited her remains in Salcombe. But what we do know is that it was an evil act carried out by an evil woman, and the only motive clearly was one of financial gain.
You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, GB News can reveal that UK maritime authorities have picked up at least 250 to 300 migrants in the English Channel today alone after responding to multiple incidents involving small boats. Earlier on, we were reporting at least 7 vessels were pushed into the water in poor weather conditions by people smugglers, with concerns that someone was swept into the sea after possessions, and unfortunately possessions alone, were found at a buoy 9 miles off the coast, but no sign of that person. The search has now been called off there. But what more can be done to deter people from risking their lives in crossing the Channel? Well, former Conservative Home Secretary Amber Rudd, remember her, has since branded the government's Rwanda policy brutal. Now, this was an exclusive interview with GB News' very own Gloria De Piero. Now, get this, actually, because Rudd also criticised Suella Braverman's suggestion that she dreams of deporting migrants to Rwanda. Have a gander at this.
Believe in it. For the start, I think it is a brutal policy, which we should not have introduced anyway, but it is also, putting that aside, impractical. I just don't believe it will ever happen. So I think there's a real problem with the growing numbers of people putting their lives in danger. In a way, it's a shared problem with the French, and I hope that this new government is going to address it by having a better relationship with the French. I mean, let's face it, it can only improve.
Rishi Sunak says he's committed to the Rwanda policy. Obviously, he's brought Suella Braverman, who I might ask you about a question about in a second, as Home Secretary, who is fervently, she dreams of sending people to Rwanda.
Yeah, I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to say. She should dream of having a safer policy, which certainly she's entitled to dream about having borders where you don't have lots of people arriving across a dangerous passage like the Channel, but not perhaps to put it quite in those terms that she has.
Well, lots to get stuck into there. Of course, Amber Rudd, former Home Sec, criticising the current Home Sec. On the day that there was massive search and rescue operations, indeed one of those search and rescue operations has been called off. It is believed, unfortunately, that that particular individual there was swept out to sea. 38,000 arrivals so far across the Channel this year. Those numbers came out today as well. And although there's some contention about the exact specifics of this, if you believe what you read in the press, which you always should in a way, around 2% of the Albanian male population have managed to make their way over here. And the Home Office is going to start paying, so we understand it, private landlords in order to house some of these People, lots to get our teeth stuck into here. And joining me now to break down the migrant crisis, is immigration lawyer Ivan Sampson and international security and border control expert Henry Bolton, OBE, nonetheless. Henry, I'll start with you. Do you dream of flights to Rwanda taking off?
No, and rather like a dream, they're not going to.
So you don't think that's ever going to happen?
I think if it happens, it will be a press opportunity. There will be photos, there will be footage, all the media will be invited. I understand the political attractiveness because it would demonstrate in a visual sense that something is happening, that the government is doing something. But as I understand it, there are only 170 beds at the moment. The upper estimate I've heard or been told is 500 beds available in Rwanda. Well, compared to the fact that we're now heading for 40,000 in the UK, that's not going to have much of a practical impact. And the reality is that the logistical and financial cost and burden is simply impractical. Now, I've dealt with these sort of things, and it's not going to work. No. There are other far easier, far cheaper, far more streamlined solutions to this, and without the political risk of
where we are now.
Comments that we've just heard.
Ivan, I'll bring you in here, immigration lawyer Ivan Sampson. 38,000 people, and we're hearing now of disorder at various different detention centres. We're also hearing as well that there have been various people running through towns. A grandmother found a particular chap in her grandson's bedroom. We've got to get a grip of this, haven't we, now? What can actually practically be done? Because people are sick and tired of now seeing all the private rentals stop being taken up as well, potentially, by these people coming over the channel.
No, I agree. I think we can't afford to have illegal migration in this country. We simply can't afford it. And the current trends are that in the next 12 months, certainly by next summer, we may see 5,000 a month coming over. The point is you have to have a distinction between those that are illegal migrants and those that are genuine refugees. I printed out some figures for you that there's 4 main countries, Eritrea, Syria, Afghanistan and Iran. Now, more than 97% of nationals from those countries are being granted asylum by the Home Office. And they make up the majority of people crossing the country.
OK.
Now, we are the founder signatories of the Refugee Convention. It is not unlawful under international law to enter the UK illegally to claim asylum. That's the law.
Yes.
And that's our international...
But I think a lot of people are concerned that there's a lot of people, frankly, taking the mick, really, when it comes to this, especially those coming from Albania.
No, I agree. But if we had safe legal routes, then Suella Braverman, before she resigned and was reappointed, wanted a blanket ban on illegal migration. Now, if we had safe legal routes, then that policy may work. It would seem fair.
Yes.
But you need to have the safe legal routes first before you start putting a blanket ban.
Well, this is it. Henry Bolton, I'll bring you back in now, because Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, told me right here on GB News Live that cost of housing these people in hotels per day and in various different other forms of accommodation has now risen from 5 million a day to apparently 6.2 million a day. I'm not being funny, but for that amount of money, we could build a massive island somewhere in the middle of the sea and potentially do the processing there or something like that to stop... isn't that a safe legal route? Come on.
I think there's all sorts of things, Patrick, and the temptation is to say we apply one solution and it's going to fix or significantly impact the problem. And that's not the case, because the people who are moving from different parts of the world are moving for different reasons. They're encouraged by different motivations, including the encouragement in some cases of organised crime.
Absolutely.
We're recruiting them into this movement. In the case of Albania, where we've got a very large proportion of them at the moment are coming from Albania. Now, the thing, I was advisor to the Albanian Prime Minister, and I led until 2006, a little while ago, but the situation's only improved, not got worse in that era. I led the UK's efforts to disrupt transnational organised crime across the Southern Balkans, including Albania, and mainly Albanian people smuggling. They've been at it for years. They're masters at it.
Yes.
And the thing is that Albanians do have a way of getting into the country legally. There's a visa system. They get into the European Union for 3 months without a visa. But the thing is, they actually don't qualify on the point system to come here. So what they do is they get into the European Union where they don't need a visa to enter. They stay there, they move to the North French Channel, and then they come across on the boats, claim asylum, But then the problem that we've got here is in our processing, we've got to think about who we take as having a legitimate claim for asylum. The bar is very low, and I think Ivan might agree. But just to say that the last time Albania itself suffered conflict was in 1997. There's no natural disaster. It's a poor country.
I get that,
and a lot of these
but they
people
do
come from Kosovo and Northern Macedonia, but claim.
Well, they also quite often claim that they are, in fear of gang violence in their own country, and therefore that can happen. Ivan, can I ask you? I was listening to GB News Radio earlier, which is, in case you're wondering, the fastest growing radio in the UK. There you are. And someone this morning was telling me, oh, gosh, we're seeing now instances where we can't really properly age check a lot of these people, and then you end up with, like, a 30-year-old bloke in the back of a maths class. There was a report about apparently some bloke had served in the Albanian army, had a wife and a couple of kids, and was in a school. I mean, is it against some of these people's human rights to do dental record checks when they arrive so we can tell how old they are?
Not at all.
Right. Why don't we do it?
You can do
you can do it.
Checks. Because we have different obligations to minors. No, you can do dental records checks. You can also check on their knowledge of their country. If someone says, I'm not from Albania, I'm from Syria, let's say.
Yes.
Let's just say.
Yeah.
You can do a knowledge test that you can conduct and make a reasonable conclusion of where they come from. We've got an agreement with Albania.
Like sing the national anthem, for example, yeah.
We've got an agreement with Albania to return them to Albania.
Yeah.
Problem is identity. And I've said it time and time again, we can use these methods and technology to identify who these people are.
It begs the question, why aren't we?
I think that's...
You're going to have to be very quick, so I'll get shouted at.
2006, we were doing this. We were bringing police officers from that region over here to do exactly to the questioning of these claimants, and said, you're not actually from Albania or Kosovo, you're from the city of Tetovo in Skopje. I can tell by your dialect.
I mean, it's fantastic, isn't it, that right here on GB News we have a discussion such as this with the wonderful immigration lawyer Ivan Sampson and, of course, the international security and border control expert Henry Bolton, OBE. And our solution to this is, why don't we just do age checks and do basic tests to find out where they're from? I mean, realistically, you would have thought, wouldn't you, that maybe we'd be doing a little bit more of this, or certainly more efficiently than we are doing it, because it does appear to be taking a rather long time. Chaps, thank you very much. I'll have you both back on again very, very soon. Right, moving on. Rishi Sunak will not be attending COP27 in Egypt next month. Downing Street has confirmed this afternoon. Good stuff. He had been expected to go to the climate conference. A spokeswoman from Number 10 said that despite the PM, the administration remains committed to net zero. Is that true, or is Rishi giving up on net zero? Joining me now from outside Downing Street to shed some light on this is GB News' political editor Darren McCaffrey. Darren, thank you very much. OK, so Rishi's not going to COP27. All right, fair enough. I mean, I suppose his U-turn on fracking is quite a good sign that he is committed to net zero, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this has got more to do with the logistics, Patrick, in many regards, rather than the politics of it all, in the sense that now Liz Truss had committed herself to going. She'd obviously told King Charles III not to go, but she herself was going to go to show her commitment to COP27 and to tackling climate change. Now, Rishi Sunak has obviously just taken over. There is a hell of a lot on his plate. You guys have just been talking about just one issue he's going to face in the weeks and months to come. Clearly, the focus for the government is on that November 17th autumn statement, and I suspect this has simply got to do with the fact that in a very, very busy schedule they simply do not have time. Now, in saying that, many people will point to the UN climate change reports that we've seen out yesterday and today, saying that we're not going to hit that target of 1.5 degrees in terms of the cap of emissions. That global warming is the most pressing issue we face globally in the world today. There is no corner of this planet that is not going to be hit by it, and that this should be a number one priority. But clearly the government has decided that actually, as I say, they've got a hell of a lot else on the plate. Not least of all, dealing with that problem with Suella Braverman, which is carrying on this evening. Lots of questions about whether she should have been reappointed as Home Secretary. We've got that crisis in Northern Ireland with the possibility elections could be called tomorrow. And in addition to that, Rishi Sunak has been talking to lots of world leaders in the last 24 hours, everyone from President Joe Biden to President Zelensky to the Irish Prime Minister to Ursula von der Leyen of the EU Commission, and this afternoon to Narendra Modi, of course, as the Prime Minister of India. Interesting, given the fact that Rishi Sunak is the first Prime Minister of Indian heritage to be in charge. The Prime Minister Modi conveyed his best wishes on the Prime Minister's appointment to the 1.6 billion Indians worldwide, and the Prime Minister said he was a visual representation representation of the historic links between the UK and India and tended to build on this relationship to develop even closer ties between the two countries. Why is that important beyond the niceties and the history is that the UK has been trying to get a trade deal, a free trade deal with India, a country of what, well over 1 billion people, would be pretty significant. Is there a possibility that that link, if you like, could make a trade deal easier? It's possible, it's very possible indeed, and that could be quite significant, particularly when it comes to economic growth.
Thank you very much, Darren. Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor in Westminster. Great stuff. It has made me laugh, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know about you. Have you seen this guy, Trevor Noah, the American TV presenter, who was on camera saying about how, you know, despite all the racism in the UK, despite the... Look at this racist backlash to Rishi Sunak becoming our Prime Minister. What racist backlash? There's been absolutely no racist backlash whatsoever to Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister. It's this ridiculous straw man argument, isn't it? In fact, I've hardly heard anyone say that Rishi Sunak really is, apart from the passing, fleeting reference, happens to be of Indian heritage. A lot of that was, by the way, was because Diwali's happening, isn't it? And so there was that kind of relevance to it, really. It's staggering, I find it, that people think that anyone really cares. But anyway, moving on. In a way, Rishi Sunak has refused to comment on the pensions triple lock, an issue I get all the time in my inbox, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Loads of people concerned about the pensions triple lock. So it raises the state pension, or can do anyway, in line with inflation. This comes after former PM Liz Truss, remember her, pledged that she would protect the guarantee. Well, that being said, Nadhim Zahawi hinted this morning that the pledge would be kept, so good news for pensioners, saying that pensioners are uniquely unable to work. Right, there we go. Joining me now to go into more detail is pension expert and, crucially, member of the House of Lords. This is the wonderful Baroness Ros Altman. Baroness Ros, I will keep saying this until I'm blue in the face. I think that pensioners in this country get a raw deal. There's a mental health crisis when it comes to the elderly. Often their energy isn't protected. They get slated by the young people who think they're all sitting on wads of cash, despite the fact that a lot of old people would give their last penny to their grandson or granddaughter, for goodness sake. The least we can do is shackle their pensions to some kind of guarantee, isn't it?
Totally right. I couldn't have put it better myself.
There you go.
And
Good
I
stuff.
cannot believe the government is seriously, once again, throwing up in the air the certainty that was promised to pensioners time and time again, that their pensions, the lowest state pension in the developed world, don't forget, we're not talking about a king's ransom here, will be protected next year against inflation fully. After they were betrayed this year, the 3.1% rise that was introduced last year that broke the 2019 manifesto promise of proper protection has already happened, and they are still living with the consequences. We cannot let them down again.
No, we can't let them down again, and any party that lets them down should beware, because the Silver Army, right, is bad when it gets going. You asked Tony Blair, the slow hand clap at the WI, that was absolute gold. And I tell you what, you know, they do represent, especially in an ageing population, an increasing number of voters and a very vocal number of voters. And yes, OK, a lot of them have got a bit of time on their hands to go and tell all their neighbours how angry they are as well, let's be honest. So they need to get the golden oldies on side, don't they? It would be suicide, political suicide, if they decided to ditch the pension triple lock.
Well, I'm not even talking about the politics of this. I'm talking about the moral imperative, having promised that you're going to do something that millions of people in your country are relying on and have trusted you about. You cannot snatch it away at the last minute. You must not do so. What values do we live by? And the point for me is that we're talking about a state pension that is already so low. We're not talking about people who can't afford to upgrade their smartphone or can't afford to have a holiday this year. This is people who are living on, if you're on the old basic pension...
Yeah, exactly.
£7,500 a year. And
well, minus the BBC licence fee. Yeah, minus the licence fee as well. But there we go. No, but seriously, just more generally, OK, I look at some other countries around the world and think, gosh, you know what? The way that you treat the elderly appears to be so much better than the way you treat them here. It's not that common. Certainly in I suppose, what would you say, native British culture or whatever, for the grandparents to live with you when they get old, or for to be necessarily looked after in their own home, in a way that it is very common in a lot of other cultures. And I must say, I look at that and I think, yes, all right, I can fully understand for people why it might be annoying to have the mother-in-law upstairs, but it's the right thing to do sometimes, isn't it? Could we do a bit more?
Well, again, I think the right thing to do is to respect the value to society of having older generations and to honour our commitments to them when we make them. They don't expect to be royally treated. And most of them are from generations that understand the meaning of budgeting and living according to your means and try their best not to be a burden on anybody. That's the last thing most of them want. And of course, there are some very well-off pensioners. They're very lucky. But there are millions, and especially women, who have little or nothing else but this meagre state pension. Other countries pay far more than we do. And I'm sorry, but it is not possible to believe that our country can't afford to increase that low pension by just inflation. That is a political choice, and it would be the wrong one.
I agree. I don't always sit here and go, we should splash the money around and union pay rises this and union pay rises that. That's not what I'm talking about. But when you look at some other areas where we're spending money on in this country to the tune of millions and millions and millions of pounds a day, for example, and we spoke a little bit earlier on about the whole migrant hotel thing, which, of course, I wouldn't ask you to comment on. But, yeah, you look at that and go, well, hang on a minute. Of course we have got the money there to help out people who've paid into this system their entire lives. Anyway, gosh, before I get pretty wound up about pensions, I hope someone looks after me when I'm old. Anyway, thank you very much. Baroness there, Baroness Ros Altman, pensions expert and member of the House of Lords. Good stuff. Right, this is GBNews Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, 2 new studies have found that long-term use of vaping products can be just as bad for your heart as smoking cigarettes. That's good news for me, because in that regard, I am not a quitter at smoking or nothing. That's next.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel. Well, something now that I think we've all suspected for quite a while, which is that 2 US studies have found that long-term use of vaping products, which, by the way, are now being increasingly sold and used by children who never smoked in their lives, can be just as bad for your heart as smoking cigarettes. the real McCoy. Scientists have found that sustained use of electronic cigarettes can significantly impair the function of the body's blood vessels, leaving people at increased risk of heart disease. The negative effect of tobacco on the heart has long been recognised, but less has been known about the impact of vaping. Joining me now is John Dunn, Director General of the Vaping Industry Association. Now, I'm not being funny, but this is something we've known for a while. When the very first vapes came out, I got one, right? And this is years ago, and I had one in my pocket, and it leaked, and it burnt a hole through my jacket.
Well, you know, that's kind of different than the subject we're talking at the moment. The devices from 10, 15 years ago are a lot different than they are now. And taking a look at these studies, you know, frankly, it's ridiculous. You know, the study looks at mice and blood samples and tried to extrapolate the results to humans. And this makes absolutely no sense. You know...
Hang on a minute, isn't that... That's what we do with a lot of medication and treatments, isn't it? We test it on animals and then extrapolate that data out onto humans.
Well, absolutely, but mice are not humans. It's impossible to make that assumption. And in fact, there was one comment I saw made on the paper today which I thought was hilarious. And it says this study shows that mice exposed to e-cigarette aerosol in enclosed spaces for 90 minutes experience short-term changes in cardiac rhythm. Although the long-term effects of these changes are not known, it seems prudent that the owners of pet mice should not allow their mice to be to use e-cigarettes.
Well, as the proud owner of a hamster now these days, I've recently invested £8 whole. Imagine if your life was worth £8. Anyway, into a hamster called Sheila. I will not be vaping anywhere near Sheila for a sustained 90-minute period and then trapping her in a kind of fruity-flavoured sauna. But on a serious note, though, my concern now, you walk down the street, is kids with vapes. All the time. Now, they never smoked, these kids. They never had tobacco to begin with. These weren't people who wanted the vape to wean them off the old nicotine or whatever. So the fact is, vapes are now a bit targeted at kids, aren't they? They light up, they've got colours on. It's like, I mean, they're marketed at kids, let's be honest.
Absolutely not. And the data backs that up. So first of all, smoking rates are declining at a faster rate, both in young people and in adults, since vaping was brought in. Now, if you look at the Action for Smoking on Health report, which highlights youth vaping, when you look at the amount of young people that are vaping that weren't previously smoking, which is highly important, and that vape on a regular basis, that number is extremely low. And even in their own report, they say that this is normal teen trial. So the data just does not back up that supposition.
But is it good for you in any way, shape or form? It's got to be worse for you than just not inhaling anything.
Absolutely, we agree. And if you don't smoke, you shouldn't vape, period. Okay. But for anybody that's smoking, what we do know, and the studies back this up hugely, is that vaping is far less harmful for you than smoking. But it is harmful, compared to breathing fresh air.
All right, good stuff. Fantastic. Thank you very much, John. In fact, it's terrible timing for me to realise that I've completely run out of my deck of Camel Blues. But there we go. John Dunn, Director General of the Vaping Industry Association. I know. Anyway, right, OK, look, coming up, we've got loads to talk about because much more serious story this. We're going to be talking about grooming gangs. 2 members of that Rochdale grooming gang can now finally be deported. They've shown little to no remorse, frankly. In fact, they said they'd not committed that big of a crime. One of them got a 13-year-old girl pregnant, for goodness sake. £2 million in legal aid for them and others. This is happening right across Britain. I'm sick and tired of it. Get them on the next plane out of here. But first, it's Polly Middlehurst with the news.
Patrick, thank you. And our top story, talks to restore devolved government in Northern Ireland are in stalemate today ahead of a legal midnight deadline to call an Assembly election. The parties met earlier but failed to elect a Speaker or the First and Deputy First Ministers. Ireland's Prime Minister says there is still time to avoid a fresh election in Northern Ireland, and he has urged the Democratic Unionist Party to enter into talks. Meanwhile, Russia's president has accused the West of playing a bloody and dangerous game and seeking global domination. Vladimir Putin, who's been addressing his country today, has also called the former Prime Minister Liz Truss crazy to discuss nuclear weapons, and he told Russians he wants to control global resources. Meanwhile, Elon Musk has claimed he's bought the social media company Twitter to help humanity. The Tesla boss has a deadline of tomorrow to complete the £38 billion purchase, which he announced months ago but tried to get out of. Yesterday, he posted a video of himself carrying a bathroom sink into the Twitter headquarters, captioned, "Let that sink in." In other news today, a therapist has been remanded in custody after being found guilty of killing her friend and then dumping the body more than 200 miles away. Gemma Mitchell allegedly killed Mi Quen Chong at her London home in June last year, then left the decapitated body in Devon 2 weeks later. The prosecution claimed Mitchell planned to murder the 67-year-old to inherit a claim in her estate. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Patrick's back in just a minute.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank and, of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, 2 members of a Rochdale grooming gang are to be deported to Pakistan, finally, after losing a 7-year legal fight, which you and I paid for, to remain in Britain's gang members Adil Khan and Quarry Ralph. Remember those faces, because hopefully we'll be waving goodbye to them shortly. Were convicted in 2012 of a series of brutal sexual offences against young girls and jailed later the same year. The pair mounted a legal challenge after Theresa May, the then Home Secretary, told them they would be deported. But the question remains, why has it taken so long for these 2 criminals to be deported to another country? Joining me now in the studio is GB News documentary filmmaker Charlie Peters. Charlie, thank you very much. Now, you've been looking at this issue for us, haven't you, a lot. Just talk to us about what you can give us a bit of a preview to what's coming up for us there.
Well, I'm making a documentary for GB News on this grooming gang scandal. Across the country, GB News has reported from and researched up to 50 different towns and cities where we think these crimes have taken place. Many of them have avoided police attention, many of them have avoided media attention, and we are hoping to rectify that with our campaign.
Why have many of them avoided media and police attention, do you think?
Well, the 2 towns have captured most of the public's attention. That's Rotherham and Oldham. Yep. Both of them have enjoyed inquiries led by independent government bodies. But the others, I think, people don't understand just the grave extent of this crisis. And the main reason for that, I think you and I both know, is the kind of the racial nervousness around the ethnicity of the background of the perpetrators and the disparity between perpetrators and victims, often men of Pakistani ethnicity and young white working class girls from troubled backgrounds. This creates a lot of anxiety for certain people, but we are looking to push straight past that and be honest and tell the truth on this problem.
Yeah, it's about time somebody did that, actually. And the fact is, this is a pandemic, an epidemic, isn't it?
It is. And when we've had the Rotherham reports, about a decade ago now, the scale of the problem wasn't known. And we had a report from Alexis J came in and said that there were 1,400 victims. This is a town of 140,000 people. So 1% of the entire town. Yeah. And that's just one small sliver of the population were enduring this horrific abuse. When the National Crime Agency came in, Britain's FBI, they found another 100 victims. So Operation Stowford by the NCA found another 100. So we want an NCA investigations into every single town and city where significant and credible reports of these rape gangs has taken place. Because when we have these investigations, we invariably find more victims, more perpetrators and more people waiting for justice. And that's
what you're calling for, is it? Yeah. An NCA investigation across the board. Yes. And that, frankly, is something that should have been happening a long time ago. What fascinates me, Charlie, is when they go, we wanted to tread lightly with this investigation for fear of stoking racial tensions. I'll tell you what stokes racial tensions is when you have a group of predominantly South Asian men, men of Pakistani heritage, raping systematically on an industrial scale, gang raping in some cases, vulnerable young working-class white girls, and the general members of the public think that absolutely naff all is being done about it by police. That stokes racial tensions.
Absolutely, and the members of the public are right to think that, because naff was being done and is being done. Many of the girls that we've spoken to, many of them now kind of women in their 30s, have described to us, to the GB News team, that they were in and out of courts more regularly than their rapists, that they were deemed troublemakers who enjoyed having a Pakistani boyfriend as a fashion accessory. They were treated with utter disdain. And the main reason why we're making this documentary isn't just to right historical wrongs, but because we have credible reasons to believe that this crisis is still going on.
Indeed. Well, of course it is. It absolutely 100% is, and it will not be the last time that we hear about it. And it sickens me when you see other media outlets at pains tripping over themselves to not report it. When the Telford grooming gang scandal story broke, believe it or not, that day I was searching for it on the BBC website. You had to go to their local Shropshire page, and 2 stories down, and there it was. At the time, it was the UK's largest ever grooming gang scandal. And our national broadcaster decided that it wasn't big enough to put on the home page. I find that absolutely scandalous, to be perfectly honest.
Absolutely, and the crisis of major organisations, major government organisations ignoring this has been the main problem, I think, throughout.
Political parties ignoring it.
Indeed. There isn't a more senior institution that you can find that hasn't kind of found their way to kind of cause a way of avoiding this problem seriously. So even the Home Office, in its report into the rape gang scandal, whitewashed the issue of ethnicity, tried to push it into the long grass, tried to turn people away from the truth on this. The GB News documentary team is going to take this problem head on. We're going to look at real recording of data. We're not going to cause a whitewash here and put wool over your eyes.
What you're trying to do is put together something that so unequivocally and undeniably reveals the true extent of the grooming gang problem in this country in order to force action.
Absolutely.
As opposed to trying to cover it up.
Yes, and we are relying on some incredibly brave people to do that. So in order to produce this documentary, we're relying on the testimony of victims and survivors who for decades have been ignored. These are people who have spoken to other cameramen before.
They've tried to get help. They've tried.
I mean, they've done everything. And in some cases, the most horrifying scenario we've encountered, at least personally, was the story of a father in Rotherham who, when he reported to the police what was happening to his daughter in real time, he was arrested himself and told to stay away from the house. He was arrested and he was deemed to be causing trouble while his daughter was being raped moments away. It's absolutely horrifying.
It's unbelievable. I would argue as well, by the way, that there is an element of racism already in this, which is the fact that if you look at the demographics of the victims, all too often is vulnerable young working-class white girls, and I think this because there's a sense that they are deemed lesser than.
Yes, absolutely, and I don't want to repeat the language used by the rapists currently on air, but I can assure our viewers that it is horrific and it is racialised.
Yeah.
And they are targeting white girls in particular. There is a broad, clannish, cultural perspective shared among many of the rapists who we've reported on, where we find that they treat white girls as an other, as not worthy of respect, not worthy as the same treatment as others in their community. and we're trying to root this out.
Just quickly, finally, very finally, how have you found it going into some of these towns and asking some of these difficult questions? Has it been a welcoming atmosphere for you?
It depends. Some of the victims are delighted to hear from people who care about them. But at the same time, in Oldham in particular, we certainly found people who were very wary of us, who were watching us, and it was rather a menacing and threatening atmosphere in some towns. And if you're interested in finding out more, then stay tuned. It'll be coming out this year on GB News.
Yeah, fantastic stuff, Charlie. Thank you very much, and well done, actually. I think this will go down as doing a great national service, indeed. Charlie Peters there, documentary filmmaker for GB News, really trying to push the envelope here when it comes to this grooming gang scandal, a grooming gang epidemic. And if you don't think it's happening in a town or city near you, I'm sorry, it almost definitely is. Yesterday, Rishi Sunak used his first Prime Minister's questions to announce the reinstatement of the fracking ban lifted by his predecessor Liz Truss. The PM responded to a question from Green MP Caroline Lucas about the shale gas moratorium, saying that he stands by the party manifesto when it comes to the issue, which is interesting because he didn't just a few days ago. Anyway, our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has more.
Prime Minister. A tight squeeze, yes. But the new Prime Minister's first PMQs didn't disappoint, especially for the Greens.
Will he start by reversing the green light she gave to fracking, since it's categorically not been shown to be safe?
We will deliver on all those ambitions. We will deliver on what we said at COP, because we care deeply about passing our children an environment in better state than we found it ourselves.
Have a bed. The Prime Minister's spokesperson later confirmed that the controversial ban on fracking was indeed back after his predecessor Liz Truss briefly removed it. In Derbyshire, local campaigners had feared the effects if discarded plans to frack near Eckington would return too, according to one Lib Dem councillor.
There was the noise pollution, the light pollution, the traffic movement, the fact that it would be affecting their local environment. And that's why they were against it, and that's why they rallied around to make sure that there was this Eckington Against Fracking group, which have done an amazing job in North East Derbyshire combating fracking.
But not everyone is happy, including the industry reps at UK Onshore Oil and Gas.
This decision is unjustified and unjustifiable. We are going to need natural gas in the UK for decades. If they go ahead and reimpose a moratorium, my question is, where is the natural gas going to come from? And what are the economic, environmental and geopolitical consequences of that decision? This all needs to be seen in that light.
In fracking, highly pressurised water and chemicals are blasted underground, releasing gas. The Tories paused exploration projects in 2019. Years of protests and investigations highlighted the risk of earthquakes around drilling sites like those experienced here in Lancashire. Yet now a global crisis has questioned Britain's energy security. Fracking could help. Campaigners at Just Stop Oil say no matter the necessity, fossil fuels are not the answer.
We have so many solutions to the climate crisis and to the cost of living crisis that we're just not using. It could be insulating homes, subsidising public transport, taxing the big oil polluters.
The prohibition on fracking is technically temporary, and political precedent can change as quickly as Prime Ministers. Will Hollis for GB News in Derbyshire.
Right, well, oil giant Shell has reported another quarter of huge profits. The energy firm made £8.2 billion in the 3 months to September and will increase payouts to shareholders. The earnings are lower than the previous 3 months, but still more than double the same period of last year. The profits are likely to lead to repeated demands from opposing political parties and environmental campaigners for the government to look again at the higher windfall tax on oil companies, something that Cabinet Minister Nadeem Zahawi has not ruled out. Well, is all as it seems? How do you feel about it? Are you feeling the pinch at the minute? Are you freezing to death in your own homes in these unseasonably warm conditions that we're seeing at the minute? Do you think that these oil and gas companies are earning far too much money, or actually it's not just the world that we live in? Joining me now in the studio is Andy Mayer, Energy and Infrastructure Analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the IEA. And joining me down the line is Robert Palmer, Executive Director of Tax Justice UK. Andy, I will start with you. Do you think that it's time now for higher windfall taxes? These oil and gas companies, they can't possibly be unfeasibly rich.
Well, let's not be daft about it. There are already 3 windfall taxes on the North Sea, which amount to 65% of their profits compared to 19% for current companies. So even though it's rising to 25, it's still a 40% premium. So no, there is going to be a windfall for the Treasury, and it's coming from the existing taxes. That is sufficient. We don't need a new tax.
OK, Robert Palmer there, who is Executive Director at Tax Justice UK. We don't need an additional windfall tax. What do you think?
Well, at the moment, politicians are talking about making hard choices when it comes to the country finances. We're going to go into a winter where lots of households are going to really struggle to pay their bills. And you have an oil giant like Shell making £8 billion in just the last 3 months. Now, it's not just me who supports the idea of a beefed up windfall tax. It's not just, left-wing politicians. It is also the boss of Shell himself, who said today that he was expecting to see politicians come and ask oil and gas companies to pay more in tax. And it feels as though...
Did he say he'd give it to him, though? That's the thing. I mean, I'm expecting at some point to get a knock on the door and someone tell me I've not paid my TV licence. But, I'm not necessarily going to pay it.
Well, I mean, I think, political choices are often difficult. This feels like a really easy political choice. You have oil and gas companies making billions of pounds of extra profits because of Putin's war in Ukraine. The companies themselves are saying that they should be paying in more tax, and the government is looking for more money. I mean, it feels like both economically and politically.
And Andy, Andy Mayer, where does this end at some point? Because there's always going to be disadvantaged people in the world. There's always going to be people making money off whatever particular disadvantage there is. Do we try to come after them as well? What's the point in wealth creation,
Well, this one ends with serious companies ignoring the UK and refusing to invest here because we have both a government and an opposition that's creating an environment where they cannot invest safely. I mean, these are the politics of a banana republic. If you arbitrarily tax people every time they're successful, then you're going to end up with nobody successful wanting to invest in you as a country. So I appreciate the ex-boss of Shell, the one who's outgoing, had made some silly comments in the press, but then he's seeking his next job, probably with an international environmental NGO, where he can sit there being woke to his heart's content while his former employees suffer as governments come after them to try and steal the money that they have made.
Yeah, and wash his hands of what they've done. It does absolutely crack me up when companies like BP, for example, their entire advertising campaign is based around, oh, look at us, we're nice, this woke company. Anyway, Robert Palmer, Executive Director of Tax Justice UK. Do you want to live in a banana republic, Robert?
Well, I mean, we almost had a banana republic with a crashing economy over the last months with the IEA's economic plans, which have thankfully been scrapped.
Shots fired. Oh no! We didn't have the timing of the IEA have got to him. Andy Mayer of the IEA, you've got friends in high places. Some of those are apparently in our internet connection department.
It's a bit tragic when we hear this argument that the £2.4 trillion national debt was created in a single afternoon in September by one think tank saying things in public that were different to the policies of the government. So no, complete nonsense. What we need to do at the moment is focus on getting a healthy growth environment back, which means a low-tax, low-regulation environment, keeping things safe and secure, but getting on with the job of building new companies in this country.
Robert, sorry, that was very unfortunate timing, given what you just said there, but you are back now. Let's just stick to the issue at hand, which is that we're talking, of course, about whether or not we should have these windfall taxes, etc. Some people would say, like Andy's saying there, which is that it might put investment off, and actually, we could potentially not have to tax the living heck out of them and make more money out of that by having more of them here.
I mean, I think there are 2 points. One is these are extraordinary times and extraordinary profits, and that's why people are talking about windfall taxes. Margaret Thatcher introduced a number of windfall taxes during the 1980s. And then secondly, perhaps it would be one thing if Shell and BP were using their windfall to invest in, for example, green alternatives, but most of this money is going straight back to shareholders in buybacks or dividends. And so this feels like a really sensible approach to ask these big companies to pay more. The alternative is potentially cuts to public services.
Andy?
Well, why on earth would they reinvest the money in renewables projects, given the government and the opposition are both threatening to put a windfall tax on them as well? I mean, this is the problem. As soon as you start going down the route of arbitrary taxation, where do you stop? We've got it on oil and gas companies. We may have it on renewables. We've got it on banks as well. Everywhere where the UK has industry that's doing well, we try and tax it into submission.
Go on then, final answer to you then, Robert. I mean, that, I suppose, sums it up, doesn't it, really? Why on earth would they invest in that kind of stuff if they're going to be taxed a living heck on that as well?
I mean, the UK has got some of the lowest rates of tax on oil and gas companies and extraction around the world. Clearly oil and gas companies are still in this country. This is an extraordinary moment. The government needs to raise more money to protect public services. asking oil companies who themselves are saying, please tax us, seems very sensible to me.
All right, both of you enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Andy Mayer, Energy and Infrastructure Analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the IEA. And joining me as well there was Robert Palmer, Executive Director of Tax Justice UK. We've got to go to a response from Shell now, because, as we've heard, they've got absolutely bucket loads of cash and, well, gosh, I imagine they could afford good lawyers. In response to Shell's second highest quarterly profit on record, the firm's finance chief, Sinead Gorman, said, "We simply are investing more heavily than we have, and therefore we don't have profits which we can be taxed against." I think we're out of jail now, are we? No, not quite. The chief executive of Shell, Ben van Beurden, also said the company is working closely with governments and customers to address their short and long-term energy needs. That's not, sorry, hang on, that's not even a statement. Right, OK, anyway, well, I, for one, am glad we read that out. Up next is Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. She's on the road tonight, yeah, she is. Yes, Michelle, great to see you out and about. From Shell to another Michelle, there you are. What are you talking about tonight?
Hello, Patrick. Yes, I am indeed in one of my favourite places, quite frankly, a bar. I mean, what's not to love? But joking aside, I'm also in Boris Johnson's constituency, Uxbridge and South Ruislip. So lots to ask tonight. Boris Johnson, I want these guys' thoughts here. Is he a good MP? Also, I want to talk about politics generally. Lots to talk about, isn't there? Also, NHS strike. Should nurses, porters, anyone, quite frankly, involved in the NHS be allowed to strike? And Prince Harry, we now know, don't we? His book, Spare, is coming out in January. Is that a good thing? Not? Who cares? I don't know. Guess what? Confession. I found myself looking into it today. I might even buy it. I've confused myself. I think I need a good lie down. Anyway, that is what is coming up for you at 6.
Yes, Michelle, it sounds great as ever. Jubes & Co, Michelle Dewberry out there in Boris Johnson's constituency. Good place for it, good timing for it. And just on that, Prince Harry's book called Spare, apparently the audiobook is narrated by Prince Harry himself, but perhaps they've had to do a lot of editing because he had to keep taking breaks so he could go out and cry and hug a tree, and then there's some shouting from his missus in the background and all of that stuff. But yes, thank you very much everyone who's been getting in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I'll just finish with one from Alan, who says, keep fighting a good fight when it comes to the grooming gang scandal. It's happening right across the country. We will. In fact, GB News has gone to great lengths to actually produce a documentary on that that's going to be out later this year, and it reveals the shocking true extent. We are not a media company that will cover up what we can see and we can all see happening before our very eyes. Instead, we'll shine a light on it and hope that something will actually get done. Thank you very much, everybody. I will be back, not at the usual time tomorrow. I'll be back at 7 till 9 p.m. for Friday Night Feast, which I'm looking forward to. It's going to be a spectacular, ladies and gentlemen. You have been watching me, Patrick Christys, on GB News Live. Jubes & Co is up next. Thank you very much, everybody. I will see you, well, tomorrow at 7. Take care.
Hello there, I'm Stephen Keats with your latest Met Office forecast, and we've seen some rain pushing its way northwards over the last few hours. This will be across northern England and Scotland this afternoon. Brighter spells developing further south. It's quite a breezy picture out there, and once again it's very warm because the winds are coming up from a long way south. The rain is tied in with this occlusion here, which will be pushing its way further north. Then a bit of a gap in the weather fronts for the remainder of today and into tonight before this cold front brings in some heavy rain into parts of Northern Ireland this evening. Elsewhere, though, we'll see some clear spells. The odd shower across parts of eastern and southern England, the last of the rain clearing away from northern Scotland. But by the end of the night, we turn our attention to the west with some heavy rain pushing into some western areas, some quite squally, gusty winds tied in with this, a warning out from the Met Office for parts of Northern Ireland to end the night. And wherever you are, though, it is going to be another very mild night with temperatures in the low to mid-teens. So a very wet morning, though, to start, of course, for Friday morning for parts of Northern Ireland, particularly southwest Scotland, running up towards the Western Isles as well. Some heavy rain pushing its way across other parts of Scotland and Northern England. Not too much on this front as it crosses England and Wales. And then by the afternoon, the heaviest rain then confines to the far northeast of Scotland with sunny spells and the odd blustery shower to close out the day. Once again, though, it will be a very mild day, perhaps down a notch in terms of top values compared to what we'll see today, but still well above average for the time of year. Friday evening then sees further showers pushing back into some northern and